Hello and good morning. In the last class, we had started our discussion on India's relations with Europe, and we had seen the European Union as a regional organization whose character we said is that of a hybrid body. Hybrid means it displays the characteristics of both a nation state as well as an organization, because it has its own currency, it has its own flag, and it has its own external representation. Do you remember this? Okay. And then we said that this organization is supranational in terms of decision making. It takes decisions above the level of nation states, meaning nation states have empowered it to take certain important decisions on behalf of it. So we said that this can be called a supranational body as well. And then we said, if you would remember, that this organization is important because it has certain achievements to its name, which is a helping Europe in post Second World War reconstruction, and thereby Europe becoming world's largest trading bloc, including Europe being the largest export partner for more than 100 countries in the world. ये किया था हमने? Okay. And then we said that Europe is also an important market of more than 550 million people with high disposable income, more than $30,000, around $39,000 of per capita income of Europe. That means that it would always be an attractive market. All right, if you compare it, for example, to per capita income in India or even with China, that's much higher. So people with high disposable income in this market make this an attractive market. And thereby we had then moved, if you would remember, to India's relations with the European Union. And there we said that India's relations with the European Union can be said to be traced back to 1960s. In 1994, India and European Union signed a cooperation agreement. But the current status of the relationship is visible since the beginning of the summit in the year 2000. And gradually, for example, by 2004, India and European Union started defining each other as strategic partners, if you will remember. And thereby we see that in this relationship, what has now become a regular part is, for example, regular diplomatic interactions or dialogues, right? Regular diplomatic interactions or dialogue. So we said the summit between these two sides is regular. We said, for example, if you want to add other dialogues, foreign policy consultations are a regular dialogue between these countries. And not only these dialogues, these kinds of dialogues, but then there are other dialogues. For example, the ASEM meeting, Asia-Europe meeting, which started in 1998. It's a platform of Asian and European leaders interacting with each other. So ASEM. So not only at the bilateral level dialogues, but also at the global level dialogues between these two sides. Or for example, Europe is known as a normative power, we had said. So Europe also has organized conferences on Afghanistan, organized conferences on Syria, and India has participated in these conferences. Now, this is diplomatic engagements. Then we said that there are other important areas where the relationship can be seen to have grown. All right. So we said economically, Europe is India's third largest trading partner. All right. European Union is India's third largest trading partner. I hope you will recall that. And generally that is the case. It is in the top 3. Sometimes it has been number 1 as well. For example, the current level of trade, and this is European Union data, is around 88 billion euros in goods, right? And then we also can say that in investments, if you will remember, in investments, 24% of India's FDI, if we trace it back to the year 2000, 24% of India's FDI comes from Europe. And we say that around 6,000 European companies, we said that around 6,000 European companies are present in India, responsible for more than 1 million jobs in India. So these are economic aspects that we had talked about. And then what we looked at is the future of this economic linkage. So there we see that the agreement called BTIA, right, Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement, is the free trade agreement that has been negotiated and that is still being negotiated between India and European Union. So UPSC, for example, in 2016 had asked a simple question in prelims examination. You had seen it, I had shown that to you. उस दिन मैंने आपको 2 सवाल दिखाए थे. All right. One on European Stability Mechanism, another on BTIA. So UPSC simply asked, the agreement known as Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement involves, all right, meaning a question of awareness. It involves whom? So 4 options are given to you: US, Canada, EU, Japan. All right. So that is basically what the question UPSC had asked. Now when we understand that the basis of this negotiation comes from what already exists between India and Europe. All right. What is the aim of any negotiation or any agreement? Either to improve the current status of engagement in any area, or to remove any difficulties that may be present in any particular area. So we see that India-European Union trade displays complementarity. It displays complementarity in terms of trade basket. All right, complementarity of trade basket, meaning we have had high level of trades. This trade has been balanced, meaning there has never been an excess of trade surplus or trade deficit. Sometimes India has trade surplus, sometimes there is a small trade deficit, meaning we can say that this kind of a trade has been balanced. Complementarity of trade basket. We have market for each other's commodities, goods. We see that this trade has also shown high growth, meaning trade has expanded. So thereby we can say that trade is high in potential. We can have further higher level of trade. But for this to happen, we have to address issues like protectionism of different kinds. Right? Generally protectionism is seen in terms of tariff or non-tariff barriers. Right? So why India and European Union started negotiating for a free trade agreement? Because of the complementarity of trade basket, because of the high growth in trade that they had witnessed, and also because there were protectionism or protectionist measures on both sides which hindered further growth in trade. So this trade negotiation started in 2007. India and European Union started their trade negotiations in the year 2007. And this trade negotiation continued till the year 2013, right? So we negotiated in multiple rounds a trade agreement, but eventually by 2013, the trade negotiations stopped or stalled, right? So what were the reasons for this status? So the reasons are threefold. One is EU's internal issues. All right. For example, EU's focus was more in this time on managing internal issues like Eurozone crisis. Right. Starting from global financial crisis of 2008, certain European economies which are part of Eurozone had shown certain macroeconomic difficulties. For example, defaulting on their debt payment, debt default. For example, Greece. All right. So that is one period in which European Union's attention is more on its internal issues, right? Now, when we see this, the other issue is fundamental differences in positions. All right. So on specific issues, India and European Union through their negotiations realized that they have certain differences for which there is no middle ground as of now. All right. So fundamental differences emerged in this particular period in their trade negotiations. And some people say that there were other issues. For example, Italy and India developed differences on the issue of Enrica Lexi, the issue of Italian Marines. If you would remember, in the lecture on Indian Ocean, we had talked about the issue of Italian Marines being arrested by India because they had fired on Indian fishermen, right? So some people say that these kinds of issues also played a role in lack of progress in trade negotiations after this period. But we said that two major reasons. One, EU related, that EU faced internal difficulties in terms of its focus being on internal issues, managing the Eurozone crisis. What is Eurozone? The countries of European Union who use Euro as their currency, right? So we will remember that all members of European Union are members of what is called European Economic and Monetary Union. All right. At the monetary policy level, they have a unified approach. All members of European Union are part of European Economic and Monetary Union. But only 19 countries out of these use Euro. So these countries of European Economic and Monetary Union who use Euro are called Eurozone countries. All right. And यहाँ पे बहुत सिंपल डिबेट था कि भाई इनकी मदद की जाए नहीं की जाए. जर्मनी जैसे देशों का कहना था कि मदद नहीं करनी चाहिए, गलती इनकी है. They have been showing false records. अब इनको अगर ये डेट डिफॉल्ट कर रहे हैं तो इनको ऑस्टेरिटी मेजर अपनाना चाहिए. So these are debates within the European Union. All right. So then that means that in these kinds of on these kinds of occasions, external developments become less important for any country or any body. Fundamental differences, we take these further because we understand that ultimately by 2017, India and European Union decided to resume the negotiations. All right. They decided to resume the negotiations in 2017. And that eventually became, first of all, a subject of dialogue itself. And in 2021, for example, they constituted what is called high-level trade and economic dialogue. All right. They established a high-level trade and economic dialogue in 2021 as a way of, as the platform to further negotiate free trade agreement. And in 2022, the negotiations resumed. All right. So we have again started negotiating what? The agreement which was stalled, which stopped in 2013. All right. So that thereby we understand that the reasons for the agreement, why we are interested in the agreement, remain the same. But what we also understand is when we are negotiating, these fundamental differences would still be valid. So what are these differences on? So differences on tariffs. All right. Differences on tariffs. In what areas? In two major areas. One is the area of spirits. Another, the area of automobiles. So there are two divergent expectations, right? Or divergent expectations between India and European Union on duty cut on spirits and automobiles. All right. So this is because if you see in the Indian market, the imported liquor, spirit का मतलब क्या? शराब. All right. The imported liquor in Indian market is expensive because we impose around 150% of customs duty on imported liquor. And European Union countries, most of them have their own spirits industry, right? They are wine producing countries, for example, Italy, Germany, France. they all have their own wine producing region. So wine is, or spirits are important product of the European Union, right? So there are two divergent expectations: high tariff in India and European Union countries wanting reduction in tariff, right? So that is something on which the differences still persist. Automobiles, all right, automobiles. So you see that most of the European countries have their own flagship automobile manufacturing. So then you have, if you see, let's say Germany, you have many brands, Volkswagen, all right, और कारों के बारे में आप जानते होंगे, देखा होगा अपने सड़कों पे, यूरोपियन कारें. फ्रांस का रेनो है, all right. Italy has its own Ford, right? Not Ford, but Fiat. And then many other European countries have their own flagship brands, all right. ये सारी जो गाड़ियाँ आती हैं, BMW, ये सारी जो महंगी गाड़ियाँ हैं. So again, we have a high tariff on these vehicles which are manufactured by European companies. So they would like a lower tariff. We would also like to access European market because we have also become automobile manufacturing hub. हमारी भी अपनी manufacturing है, and we are looking for the market. So there also the expectation does not meet automobile. European Union companies would like lower level of tariffs on automobiles. India as of now has not been prepared because it would like to protect the domestic manufacturing of automobiles. We have emerged as a hub of automobile manufacturing, and on the other hand, India would also like to access European market. So there is the difference where the issues have to be worked out. The second area where the differences are is the area of services. For example, the differences are on the issue of data secure status for India. All right, this is the next difference that we have: data secure status. Data secure status of for India, meaning what? So European Union has a early lead in terms of developing data provisions. For example, it developed general data protection regime, right? Or general data protection rules. So for example, in Europe you have rights like right to forget also, which came earliest in European Union. So meaning there is an emphasis on commercial aspects of data flow, but also emphasis on data security for individuals and corporations. And in India, we are still in the process of developing data related rules, norms, all right, either norms on privacy or on the use of data rights. For example, we had put in place something called the Sri Krishna Committee, all right, and Sri Krishna Committee's report was on the issues like data privacy or data protection. So as of now, we still don't have a data protection legislation. We had an earlier bill which had been discussed, but right now we don't have a comprehensive legislation on data protection. There are many other issues. We are still developing rules on the use of data, storage of data, right? So on these issues, we always have differences with the Western countries. But data protection status also means, for example, we are very ingenious people. So you must have seen, एक series आती है Jamtara, all right. You must have also get calls where people tell you कि सर आपका डेबिट कार्ड एक्सपायर होने वाला है, right? So phishing as a crime related with data. तो केवल लोकल तक हम वो नहीं है, लिमिटेड नहीं है. People open call centers and they have been phishing the data of European citizens. क्रेडिट कार्ड फ्रॉड ये सब होता रहता है. तो यूरोप कहता है कि ये भी गलत है, थोड़ा डेटा प्रोटेक्शन आपके यहाँ कमजोर है. So overall, European Union has not been willing to provide India a data secure status. For that, we need to make progress in our own data protection legislation, data protection regime, right? And B, European Union has to be satisfied. And this is important because it would help in our services sector. It is one of the largest market for Indian companies for IT and IT enabled services that we export. But in order to be fully access this market, we would need a data secure status, that India is a data secure country. It has sufficient provisions for data protection. That is not there. So we are seeking that. Europe should provide us data secure status. So on that also there are differences. Then there are differences on the issues of movement of professionals. All right, movement of professionals. And this is one demand that India would always have, as I've been telling you, because large number of people move away from India to other countries in search of work, right? They may be skilled, semi-skilled worker, or they may be highly skilled workers, right? So we say that in these kinds of markets, what is important for us is easing the movement of professionals, all right? Providing them access, greater access to opportunities in European market. So on that also, the difference remains, because ultimately it is an issue that depends on immigration reforms in EU, European Union. All right, European Union has been debating the issue of migration reform, issue of immigration. And there are differences in European Union. Countries feel that if the immigration norms are further liberalized, it would lead to an influx of people into Europe, because Europe has been in the past facing something called the refugee crisis or the refugee influx. All right, waves of refugees have been entering Europe. Some countries adopted a very liberal approach, for example Germany. Some countries, for example Romania, Hungary, adopted a rather conservative approach. So it's an internal matter of European Union, and India's demand of greater access in terms of movement of professionals depends on immigration reforms within European Union. So it's a policy area on which European Union itself has to develop clarity, right? Then the other area on which there are always differences is the area of IPR, intellectual property rights. All right, IPR issue. So if you have done your science and technology, you know IPR is basically anything that you create by applying your intellectual labor becomes your intellectual property. But that is not enough. Intellectual property needs to be protected. So that's why intellectual property rights regime developed, right? So you can protect range of intellectual properties through instruments like copyright, all right, or patents, trademark भी, और geographical indicator भी कह लेते हैं. समझ गया मैं? नहीं, सही कह रहे हैं आप. So we are saying that there is an expectation that there should be protection of intellectual property rights, and this expectation became part of international trade when WTO promoted an agreement called TRIPS, Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. So TRIPS, understand, is a flexible regime, meaning it only expects you to have mechanisms in place to protect, acknowledge, register, protect intellectual property. And India says that our IPR regime, our Copyright Act or Patents Act, these are in consonance with, comply with TRIPS provisions. All right. But you see, the concern of intellectual property rights in international trade was brought about by the advocacy of developed countries, because their economy developed in such a way that services became a large part of their economy. So they first were concerned about protection of intellectual property being a part of international trade. So TRIPS came. Now after that, they are not satisfied with TRIPS, all right, because they now want to move beyond the provisions of TRIPS. For example, they would like longer copyright or longer patent protection period, all right. So that is something that is called TRIPS Plus, the newer demands of developed countries when it comes to intellectual property rights protection. And a country like India always says that we are TRIPS compliant, and on that we are not going to negotiate much. We are TRIPS compliant because TRIPS compliance means two things. One, we are largely in compliance with international standards because we largely follow TRIPS. And two, TRIPS provides us enough flexibility to take care of public welfare needs, right? So there is always this perspective that will be helpful on issues like environment or on issues like intellectual property rights. There are two views because of the development stages in which countries are. So developing countries and developed countries have two different views. Largely, there is a broad agreement that intellectual property should be protected. On that large, broad level, there is an understanding कि ऐसा होना चाहिए. But कैसे होना चाहिए, इस पे difference हो सकता है. So on that, we can say that developed countries have more of a commercial perspective on IPR, right? For them, IPR is a commercial instrument. इसीलिए आप वो आर्ग्यूमेंट सुनते हैं कि कंपनीज इन्वेस्ट बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स इन डेवलपिंग इनोवेटिव प्रोडक्ट्स. So that's where the incentive is. Once the product is developed, they are able to secure benefits of that product, commercial benefits of that product, right? Profits. If that is not the case, developed countries would say there is no incentive for companies to invest in research and development, innovation, which is fine. That's not a wrong argument, but in the right context. But in India, if you see, we have provisions like compulsory licensing. All right. So you may have heard of the cases in the Supreme Court which upheld compulsory licensing, such as the Novartis case. All right. Many other cases in Supreme Court. So we have an approach towards intellectual property rights, which basically is a development approach, which means what? That we have given priority to the needs like health needs or access to reasonably priced medication to our population. So that's where we have developed a generic pharmaceutical industry, right? And generic pharmaceutical industry depends on a reasonable and shorter period of patent protection. आप जिंदगी भर के लिए patent protect करके नहीं रख सकते, right? There is eventually a time when patents expire, and then thereby generic pharma companies have an opportunity to develop low priced medication. So India has a development perspective which prioritizes public good, public welfare, issues like health, and Western countries have a commercial perspective which more of focus on protecting the commercial interests of corporations which invest in intellectual property. So IPR debate is about, as we say, TRIPS or TRIPS plus. All right. And this is important in cases like generic pharmaceutical sector. And remember, many of the large pharmaceutical companies are actually European companies, right? From Novartis to Sanofi, many of these are large European companies, right? So thereby, this is a regular issue where Europe would criticize India and India would stick on its own stand. And then we can say that there may be other issues like technical barriers to trade. Technical barriers to trade. On that also, we generally focus on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. All right. So what are sanitary and phytosanitary measures? Sanitary का मतलब सब समझते हैं. All right. स्वच्छता, स्वच्छ भारत अभियान. Phytosanitary, phyto, plant. All right. So these are provisions which countries adopt in order to ensure, for example, food safety standards, in order to ensure the protection of animal and plant population from contamination from contagion. All right. Contagion का मतलब spread of infectious diseases, for example, or newer diseases, for example. All right. So these are simple provisions that you will find, for example, in the case of India. India also has its own food standards. So we ensure adulteration, define adulteration. We define the amount of residue that can be there in any product, है ना? So हमेशा वो इस तरह की चीज़ें न्यूज़ में रहती हैं क्योंकि नेस्ले का मैगी, कुछ लोगों ने कहा कि इसमें क्या है ज़्यादा, लेड है. अब नेस्ले के मैगी में लेड निकल आया. पहले तो वो इशू था लेड. चलिए. So yes, you know that there are food safety laws in any country. And then plus these food safety laws, these health laws are applicable to what is being imported as well. So what we call sanitary and phytosanitary measures are simple measures which countries have to prevent contamination or contagion, to ensure the health of animal and plant population, right? So for example, a few years back, Indian cricket team went to New Zealand and the shoes of certain cricketers were checked. तो उन पे क्या निकला? मिट्टी. All right. So their shoes had mud. So New Zealand के customs official ने उन जूतों को use करने से मना कर दिया. So some countries are this sensitive, right? You can't easily import, for example, plants or animals to some of the countries. For example, Australia, New Zealand जब जाएंगे, so the rules are much more stringent. All right. So these are sanitary and phytosanitary measures which apply at customs border as well. In case of Europe, we find that in some cases, for example, Indian mangoes were not given an entry into European market because they said that they have the larva of Asian fly, all right, which is an alien species, right? So हम allow नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि हमारे standard के हिसाब से नहीं है. Or sometimes the concern is that the pesticide residue in Indian agricultural products may be high. So sometimes our products face a market access issue in Europe. So this can be seen in two ways. One, whereas the amount of pesticide or contaminants in food products is concerned, of course that has to be addressed. But if sanitary and phytosanitary measures are reasons for market entry barrier, that also has to be addressed. So sanitary phytosanitary measures are not wrong in themselves. कल जैसे मुझे किसी ने आके पूछा स्टूडेंट ने कि ये तो WTO के प्रिंसिपल से खिलाफ है, हमको ये बताया गया है. भाई the use, how you use sanitary and phytosanitary measures, that is about whether you are violating the standards of WTO or not. All right. मतलब अगर आपने उनका इस्तेमाल ट्रेड को रोकने के लिए किया है ना, तो वो हो गया ट्रेड बैरियर. बट अदरवाइज यू हैव द राइट टू हैव योर ओन सैनिटरी एंड फाइटोसैनिटरी रूल्स. अगर आप में से भी किसी को लगता है कि सैनिटरी एंड फाइटोसैनिटरी प्रोविजंस आर रॉन्ग टू स्टार्ट विथ, दैट इज नॉट द केस. एवरी कंट्री हैज द राइट टू हैव दीज काइंड्स ऑफ मेजर्स. द ओनली इशू इज हाउ दीज मेजर्स आर यूज्ड. Are they used to protect your own interests, or are they used primarily to prevent market access for the products of other countries? So if they are used as measures to prevent market access for the products of other countries, they are technical barriers to trade. All right. So sanitary phytosanitary measures अपने आप में बुरे नहीं है, अच्छे नहीं है. ये एक प्रोविजन है जो हर देश में होता है, फूड सेफ्टी लॉ, कॉन्टामिनेशन लॉ. ऑल राइट. और अगर आप उसको अप्लाई करें अपने को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए, विच इज फाइन, एवरी कंट्री हैज द राइट टू डू सो. अगर आप उसको यूज करें किसी के प्रोडक्ट को अपने मार्केट में नहीं आने देने के लिए, तो वो दैट इज रॉन्ग. ऑल राइट. सो टेक्निकल बैरियर्स ऑफ टू ट्रेड ऑल्सो हैव टू बी एड्रेस्ड इन इंडिया यूरोपियन यूनियन relations when they have to sign a free trade agreement. All right. And then we have other issues emerging. For example, the investor state dispute settlement mechanism in India's model BIT, bilateral investment treaties, since 2016-17. All right. So India had terminated its bilateral investment treaties with most of the countries, including European countries, in 2015-16, and then India came up with a draft of a model BIT. एक नया BIT हम लेके आए, एक नया proforma of BIT, bilateral investment treaty, in which there may be multiple provisions. One provision is called investor state dispute settlement mechanism, right? So what are the avenues available to an investor when there is a dispute with the state? है ना, किसी ने इन्वेस्ट किया, अब उसको प्रॉब्लम है अगर कोई, तो वो क्या कर सकता है? So these kinds of mechanisms are called investor state dispute settlement mechanism. So one provision that generally we see can be problematic is that India's model BIT provides for an investor to first exhaust domestic remedies for 5 years, meaning first address the issues in the domestic jurisdiction, है ना, अपने कोर्ट जाइए या ट्रिब्यूनल जाइए या हाई कोर्ट जाइए या सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाइए, 5 years in the domestic jurisdiction, and then only the dispute on investment can be taken to international bodies like for international arbitration, right? इसको अगर हम कंपेयर करें, फॉर एग्जांपल इन 2013 European Union had signed a free trade agreement with Singapore. So European Union's free trade agreement with Singapore in 2013 allows greater flexibility for investors. You can go to international arbitration or you can remain in domestic jurisdiction. There is no boundation. All right? So ये flexibility investors को चाहिए होती है इन्वेस्ट करने से पहले. और जहां इन्वेस्टमेंट आ रहा है खासतौर पर डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज, वो चाहेंगे कि इन्वेस्टमेंट कैसा हो, सस्टेन्ड हो. ऐसा नहीं हो कि आज आया और कल चला गया. ऑलराइट, मार्केट लो है आया, मार्केट हाई है तो प्रॉफिट लेके चला गया. इसको कहते हैं फ्लाइट ऑफ कैपिटल, हॉट कैपिटल. राइट, सो एवरी कंट्री इज कंसर्न कि इन्वेस्टमेंट का नेचर कैसा हो. तो जनरली कंट्रीज वुड लाइक कि लॉन्ग टर्म हो. राइट, इसीलिए BITs जैसे लॉज बनते हैं, बायलैटरल इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रीटीज बनती हैं, जो वो डिसाइड करती हैं कि क्या कंडीशंस होंगी इन्वेस्टमेंट की, जो ये बताती हैं इन्वेस्टर को कि आपको क्या क्या प्रोटेक्शन अवेलेबल है. सो इन आवर BIT द प्रोविजन ऑन ISDS, इन्वेस्टर स्टेट डिस्प्यूट सेटलमेंट, which requires investors to spend 5 years in domestic jurisdiction before having the recourse to international arbitration, is against the expectations of the European Union. It is against the expectations of the European Union. Why? Because if we see the recent free trade agreements of European Union, for example with Singapore, that provides for a much more flexible इन्वेस्टर स्टेट डिस्प्यूट सेटलमेंट मैकेनिज्म. अगेन यहाँ पे सही गलत की बात नहीं है. बोथ ऑफ देम हैव पर्सपेक्टिव, बोथ ऑफ देम हैव प्रेफरेंसेस, एंड दैट देयर इज अ डिफरेंस इन प्रेफरेंसेस. एक देश एक तरीके से चीज चाहता है, दूसरा देश दूसरी साइड दूसरे तरीके से चीज चाहता है. राइट, तो हमेशा सही गलत का सवाल नहीं होता. नेगोशिएशंस, दैट्स व्हाई दीज काइंड्स ऑफ नेगोशिएशंस आर डिफिकल्ट, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली इट्स एन इशू टू फाइंड अ मिडिल पाथ टू द पोजिशंस ऑफ दीज कंट्रीज. मिडिल पाथ ढूंढने का काम करना होता है, इसलिए बहुत लंबे समय तक ये निगोसिएशन चलता है. इतनी आसानी से नहीं होता है ये निगोसिएशन. सो राइट नाउ ऑल्सो दीज इश्यूज आर रिलेवेंट. जैसे किसी ने कहा, क्या कहा किसी ने, अगर आपके पास कोई क्वेश्चन है तो आप पूछ सकते हैं. डिस्कशन जितना करना था मुझे मैंने कर लिया. अब ये स्क्रॉल नहीं हो रहा. चलिए, किसी ने कहा कि भाई देखो जो हमारा मटेरियल है उसमें 2017 तक लिखा हुआ है. तो दो चीजें आप ध्यान रखें. पहला, सम ऑफ द इश्यूज एज दे वर इवन देन इन द सेम स्टेटस. ऑलराइट, ऐसा कुछ फंडामेंटली चेंज नहीं हो गया है कि हमको नया लिखना पड़े कुछ. दूसरा, whenever there is some new addition, I in the class take the responsibility of adding it. जैसे हमने कहा कि negotiations stopped in 2013, 2018 we decided to resume the negotiations, 2021 we created a high level trade and economic dialogue, and 2022 we have started the negotiation. तो issue तो वही रह गया ना. Why trade negotiations? Because of the existence of complementarity in trade. There has been a high growth in trade without a free trade agreement. So we think that with the free trade agreement, the trade would expand further. And free trade agreement would also provide us an opportunity to address certain issues. For example, protectionism, right? Either tariff or non-tariff issues, which are preventing expansion of trade in our opinion. So that's why we have started negotiating, right? And when we negotiate, these issues have to be negotiated. These issues where we have to find the solution. So we understand that going forward, what we keep in mind is this. First of all, ये तो negotiation हो रहा है, चल रहा है, तो समय समय पे अखबार पे आता रहेगा. तो इसका मतलब है कि अब आप पढ़ेंगे इसको, आप देखेंगे इस तरह के इश्यूज इसमें बात होती है. दूसरा, हम देखेंगे कि जनरल रास्ता क्या है. वन, दी BTIA is significant for both sides. Greater flexibility on key issues in view of the developing or evolving strategic ties is called for. मतलब broadly हम क्या कह सकते हैं, that we understand that there are differences, but we also understand that the BTIA is important for both sides. For India to further access European market, but also for Europe to tap into India's market. All right, India is a much less explored market for Europe. For example, India is the 10th largest partner of European Union. So there is a scope for European Union to access this market better. And India, of course, finds European Union to be its important market. India would like to sustain and go forward. So it is important for both. Thereby what we understand in these kinds of issues, what we say is this: we should take a long term view. ऐसा हम कहते हैं. क्या करना चाहिए? Long term view लेना चाहिए. So इसलिए हम कह रहे हैं कि greater flexibility is expected. Keeping in mind what? Not immediate losses and gains, but the developing strategic relations. So इसको strategically देखना चाहिए हमको, rather than from a short term perspective. ये कह रहे हैं हम. यूएस के साथ भी अगर कोई डिफरेंस है तो उसका फॉर्मूला यही है कि लुक एट इट स्ट्रैटेजिकली, लुक एट इट इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ स्ट्रैटेजिक रिलेशंस बिटवीन इंडिया एंड यूएस. सो यहां पे भी हम पहला सजेशन तो ये दे रहे हैं. दूसरा सजेशन हम दे सकते हैं जैसे सैनिटरी एंड फाइटोसैनिटरी मेजर्स. सो हम कह सकते हैं अपार्ट फ्रॉम नेगोशिएशंस, इंडिया and EU can work on a capacity building program for Indian farmers. ऑल राइट. सो एक तो जरूरत है ही भाई हमको भी पेस्टिसाइड से दूर जाने की, केमिकल फर्टिलाइजर से दूर जाने की. सो रादर देन डूइंग इट द श्रीलंका वे, सैनिटरी एंड फाइटोसैनिटरी मेजर्स में अगर आप पेस्टिसाइड यूज कर रहे हैं, केमिकल फर्टिलाइजर्स यूज कर रहे हैं, सो इट वुड बिकम एन इशू. योर प्रोडक्ट वुड अल्टीमेटली हैव केमिकल रिसाइड्यू, राइट. सो वन वे इज कीप negotiating on whatever is the issue of market access, but also work constructively. For example, capacity building program for Indian farmers. We can seek technology, we can seek finance from European Union. This can become a partnership. So wherever it's possible, partnership is required. Where flexibility? So modifications in the model BIT may be considered. ऑल राइट. यहां पे हम फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी दिखा सकते हैं. चलो 5 साल नहीं 3 साल, यूरोप के लिए 3 साल, ऑल राइट, या यूरोप के लिए एक्सेप्शन, ऐसा कुछ कर सकते हैं हम, राइट. वी नीड टू, ये सारी चीजें रिफाइन होती रहती हैं. वी हैड अर्लियर ड्राफ्ट ऑफ BIT, देन सम इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रॉब्लम्स केम, जैसे रेट्रोस्पेक्टिव टैक्सेशन के बहुत सारे केस हम इंटरनेशनल ट्रिब्यूनल में हार गए, तो हम एक और कानून लेके आ गए, वो और कड़ा बन गया. तो अब जरूरत है हमको इसको फिर से रिफाइन करने की, जो BIT है उसको फिर से रिफाइन करने की, टू बेसिकली एड्रेस आवर इंटरेस्ट. सो ये फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी, मॉडल BIT में भी, मॉडिफिकेशंस इन द मॉडल BIT में भी कंसिडर्ड, राइट. सो ये 3 चीजें हम कर सकते हैं. पहला, टेकिंग अ लॉन्ग टर्म व्यू. दूसरा, flexibilities in terms of, let's say, changes in the model BIT. तीसरा, working constructively apart from negotiations, also working in partnership to improve the capacity of Indian farmers. In what context? in the context of use of pesticides and chemical and fertilizer. और कोई तरीके हैं क्या एग्रीकल्चर में इम्प्रूवमेंट के? तो ये हमको सीखने की ज़रूरत है दुनिया से. तो जहाँ पे सीखने की ज़रूरत है उसको हम बना सकते हैं, जहाँ पे फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी कर सकते हैं वहाँ कर सकते हैं, और लॉन्ग टर्म व्यू रखना चाहिए. तो ये आइडिया है क्या होना चाहिए, राइट. सो यू कैन आंसर द क्वेश्चन अबाउट द BTIA राइट नाउ. अभी क्या हो रहा है, राइट. सो डिस्कस द BTIA negotiations as an important pillar of India-European Union strategic ties. Simple question. इसका मतलब क्या? कुछ ट्रेड डेटा आपको देना है टू एस्टैब्लिश द स्टेटस ऑफ यूरोपियन यूनियन एज अ लीडिंग ट्रेड पार्टनर ऑफ इंडिया. दूसरा आपको बताना है कि वी स्टार्टेड ट्रेड नेगोशिएशंस बिकॉज ऑफ द पोटेंशियल, द पॉसिबिलिटी, द कॉम्प्लीमेंटारिटी. तीसरा आपको बताना है कि नेगोशिएशन चला फिर रुक गया और अब नेगोशिएशन जो हो रहा है उसमें ये इश्यूज एड्रेस करना होगा. दीज इश्यूज हैव टू बी एड्रेस्ड एंड देन यू से दीज आर दी पॉसिबल सॉल्यूशंस, पॉसिबल वे आउट ऑफ दिस. किसी भी चीज को कंप्लीटली आप सॉल्व नहीं कर सकते. सर लाइक कांग्रेस ग्रास केम विथ व्हीट एंड नाउ हैज स्प्रेड ऑल अक्रॉस इंडिया. आदिश्वर ने ये एग्जाम्पल दिया. तो इसके लिए ही सैनिटरी एंड फाइटोसैनिटरी मेजर होता है. ऑल राइट. Recently, we have seen Western countries are acting against India's interest, like visit of US ambassador to POK or stuck off FTA with Britain. In this regard, can we say that India's neutral behavior towards Russia will create stalemate in India-EU FTA talk? हो सकता है और नहीं भी हो सकता है, राइट. ये तो हो भी सकता है कि भाई किसी एक पर्टिकुलर चीज पे फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस डेवलप हो जाए तो फिर उसका असर और निगोशिएशंस पे भी हो, राइट. पर गोइंग अगेंस्ट इंडियाज इंटरेस्ट, जैसे यूएस के एम्बेसडर ने पाकिस्तान ऑक्यूपाइड कश्मीर विजिट किया, ये कहना है इनका. दूसरा एफटीए के साथ, ब्रिटेन के साथ एफटीए रुका हुआ है, ये कहना है इनका. तीसरा इनका कहना है कि क्या इसका मतलब है कि इंडिया का जो रशिया के प्रति न्यूट्रल व्यवहार है ये स्टेलमेट क्रिएट करेगा इंडिया ईयू के फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट पे. ये देखने वाली बात है. इंडिया ईयू फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट अभी शुरू हुआ है, ऑल राइट. अभी पहला राउंड हमने पूरा किया है, आगे के राउंड की तरफ हम जा रहे हैं. हो सकता है दीज आर पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज, इट कैन डिटरमिन द लार्जर एटमोस्फियर, बट ट्रेड नेगोशिएशंस जनरली फोकस मोर ऑन द टेक्निकल इश्यूज ऑफ प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस, किसको कितना फायदा हो सकता है. तो अपने आप में ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट बहुत मुश्किल एग्रीमेंट होता है. इस तरह का ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट खास तौर पे हम कहते भी हैं हमेशा कि दीज आर टफ नेगोशिएशंस. फॉर एग्जांपल सम पीपल से दैट इंडिया यूरोपियन यूनियन BTIA negotiations are the toughest negotiations because of the differences that these two sides have in their approach. So अगर ये ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट फिर से रुक जाए तो एक मेजर कारण हमेशा होगा कि we are not able to make enough adjustments. So primarily because of the differences that persisted. अब डिफरेंसेस को एड्रेस करने के लिए फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी चाहिए. फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी का मतलब है कि लार्जर एटमोस्फियर ठीक होना चाहिए. सो अभी तो ऐसा नहीं कह सकते, लेकिन आगे अगर ये इशू और कॉम्प्लिकेटेड होता जाए तो हम ऐसा कह सकते हैं. जब मान लो एक ऐसी पोजीशन आ जाए जहां पे यूरोप कहे कि अब आपको पोजीशन लेना ही है रशिया के खिलाफ और हम कहें कि नहीं लेना है, तो हो सकता है कि ये एक लार्जर फैक्टर बन जाए. किसका? ऑफ द एटमोस्फियर, right? Then we can say that the right context did not exist for adjustments to be made. तो बहुत long shot वाली बात है, पर हो सकता है. But EU with regard to energy investment are also going good with Russia. If they are focusing on their national interest, why not India being in developing state should also focus on its interest? Of course, India should focus on its national interest. यही तो हम कह रहे हैं, negotiate करो. जहां पे flexibility है flexibility, जहां पे नहीं flexibility है वहां flexibility नहीं आएगी. जहां पे साथ में काम करना है वहां साथ में काम करेंगे. यही काम कह रहे हैं ना. तो बहुत ही एक फिक्स्ड व्यू लेके नहीं चलना चाहिए. हमेशा तीन चीजों की पॉसिबिलिटी रखनी चाहिए. वन, देयर मे बी अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी. डोंट लेट गो ऑफ इट, क्योंकि आपको ओवरऑल चीजों में प्रॉब्लम नजर आ रही है तो आप जहां पे एडजस्ट कर सकते हैं वहां नहीं कर रहे हैं. फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी हो सकती है तो रखें. टू, देयर आर सर्टेन इश्यूज ऑन विच देयर कैन बी नो फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी. सो दैट इज वेरी क्लियर. फॉर एग्जाम्पल इन IPR, आई डोंट सी अ पॉसिबिलिटी that India and European Union may agree on the same issue, right? On IPR, especially if the consideration is going beyond TRIPS provision. So वो इसलिए मुश्किल होगा क्योंकि अगर यहाँ पे हमने किया तो फिर और जगह पे हमको करना पड़ेगा. So that would have a larger repercussion. So that is not going to happen. So there are some places where there would be no flexibility. All right? और तीसरा, there are some places where there can be constructive solutions, give and take. All right, give and take. That, let's say, we would say that we would try to come up to European standards when it comes to sanitary and phytosanitary measures. We will try to. हमने ऐसा नहीं कहा कि हम ऐसा कर देंगे. We will try to. But for that we would require financial and technological assistance. So कहीं पे constructive, creative solutions possible हैं. ये तीन चीजें हमको याद रखनी. नेशनल इंटरेस्ट का मतलब कोई ये फिक्स चीज तो होता नहीं है. हमको अपना काम बनाना है. ऑल राइट, उसमें हमको यही याद रखना है कहाँ हम फ्लेक्सिबल हो सकते हैं, कहाँ हम फ्लेक्सिबल नहीं हो सकते हैं, और कहाँ पे एक लंबा ट्रेड ऑफ हो सकता है. लंबा ट्रेड ऑफ का मतलब आपने टाइम पीरियड बढ़ा दिया और साथ में कोई और डील. जैसे दुकान जाओगे तो शर्ट खरीदनी है, शर्ट तुमको बहुत महंगी लगी तो दुकान वाला कहेगा 1 पे 2 फ्री. ऑल राइट, या 2 पे 1 फ्री. ठीक है, तो तुम्हें वो भी अच्छा नहीं लगा तो उसने कहा कि 1 पे 2 फ्री. तो ये क्या हुआ, ये फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी इंसर्ट करना हुआ नेगोशिएशन के अंदर कि भाई आप कुछ तुम्हारी कुछ हमारी. दुकान में हम कहते हैं ना जाकर के, ना तुम्हारी ना हमारी. किसी ने 500 रुपये मांगे कि ये 500 रुपये में, तो हमने कहा 150 रुपये में. कहा 150 बहुत कम हो जाएगा. ऐसे बार्गेन होता है, जो पीपल गो टू मार्केट्स एंड बार्गेन. ऑल राइट, 500 रुपीज, 150 रुपीज, एंड देन अल्टीमेटली यू क्लोज द डील एट 350 रुपीज. ऊपर से कुछ धनिया और मिर्च भी दे दो. ये होता है ना. तो ऐसे ही तो निगोशिएशन करते हैं. इसमें क्या ये सोचने की बात है फिक्स हो गया, वो वहां चले गए तो ये हो गया, वो वहां चले गए तो ये हो गया. निगोशिएशंस इसीलिए लंबे चलते हैं, है ना, क्योंकि आपको कई बार पता होता है कि ये नहीं होगा, वो नहीं होगा, फिर क्या होगा. और एटमॉस्फेयर इंपॉर्टेंट होता है क्योंकि फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी तभी हो सकती है जब आप ब्रॉडली अच्छे माहौल में काम कर रहे हो, है ना. तो ये इन द लॉन्ग टर्म कैन अफेक्ट. Now let's talk about other areas, prospective areas. When we say strategic ties, so we generally talk about areas where newer forms of partnerships can develop. So for example, India and European Union have their dialogue in areas like environment. So India European Union Environment Forum, or India European Union Water Dialogue, India European Union Green Energy Partnership, right? Clean Energy Partnership. These are areas in which we have started working. If you see why, क्योंकि in global climate change negotiations there is no question that countries should not act, but countries in order to act should realize that there are different capabilities and different requirements. So India always has been standing for what? अगर आपको यूपीएससी के इस बारे क्वेश्चन का आंसर भी देना था, India stood for CBDR, for example, common but differentiated responsibility. One actual part of that CBDR has been that the West should provide technology and finance, either to make energy transition in these countries or to adopt sustainable practices or to change energy basket. ये होना चाहिए, ये हम कहते हैं. तो this now reflects in the kinds of issues, areas in which we have been engaging with European Union. So यहाँ पे, for example, this year current affairs, if you see Denmark, right? There was a visit to Denmark. So Denmark, we said that we would be cooperating in the area of clean energy or renewable energy. So first there is dialogue, then we may have some work program. With Germany, for example, we have partnership in terms of green urban mobility. For example, earlier we moved to CNG buses, now we are talking about moving to electric vehicles. So where would the money, technology come from? So this is one area of the future. When we say strategic, one meaning is long-term future. All right, one area of the future where Europe can be an important partner. All right. Similarly, you have another area in which there has been a lot of movement globally. For example, connectivity. So here in 2021, most recently, India and European Union launched what is called comprehensive connectivity partnership. All right, India and European Union launched comprehensive connectivity partnership, right? Meaning they are saying that we would participate commonly, jointly in connectivity and infrastructure projects, all right, within the democratic framework of governance, within the transparent framework of transparency, all right. And what is this all about? This is all about how globally there are multiple connectivity initiatives. कौन कौन से connectivity initiatives globally? BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Any other? हाँ? INSTC, चलो वो भी मान लिया. Any other? करंट अफेयर्स पढ़ रहे होंगे आप. Any other? Build back better तो ठीक है. अब आ गया PGII, which is Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, G7 initiative. All right. So globally, a competition in terms of connectivity and connectivity model is shaping up, in which we find that India, of course, is not going to partner with China on BRI, but India can partner with other countries, other groups, right? So we have comprehensive connectivity partnership with European Union. European Union launched what it called the Global Gateway Project, Global Gateway Project, all right, which is about 300 billion euros of investments in infrastructure. So European Union has announced its own initiative of infrastructure and connectivity, which is called Global Gateway Project, 2021 December. And what is it all about? In the next 7 years, European Union would be investing or making available 300 billion euros of investments for connectivity projects. So we see that there is an opportunity to draw from this. India and European Union have a comprehensive connectivity partnership, and European Union has a global program, as it calls Global Gateway Project, in which it has made commitments for finance. So now this is an opportunity where we can build a convergence in terms of partnership between India and European Union and European Union's initiative, which is Global Gateway Project. All right, and that is also talking about the larger global future. All right, and then we have the strategy paper, documents like strategy paper of 2018 of European Union, or the adoption of the goals of the strategy paper in India European Union work plan. So we see that the future is in how does European Union want to improve relations with India. So these kinds of papers say that A, by enhancing strategic dialogue. So first way in which this relationship can be sustained in its strategic sense is having a regular strategic dialogue. That is what European Union has proposed. So we have the dialogues like summit, we have the consultation at the level of foreign policy. Now we can have further regular strategic dialogue. We can create a new platform called India European Union Strategic Dialogue at the highest level. That's what European Union is saying that we can do. Then European Union is saying that India European Union can benefit from cooperation in other regions of common interest. So for example, here the example that is often given is for the region of Central Asia and Afghanistan, for example, right? So that is another way in which relations can be expanded in the real strategic sense, cooperation in other regions. So we keep on saying India should partner with like-minded countries. उसका मतलब ही यही है कि there is an opportunity. Other countries are proposing such kinds of cooperation, other regions of interest, right? Then another driver of this cooperation in the future, strategic cooperation, is cooperation in the larger Indian, or now we say Indo-Pacific region. So European Union came up with its own Indo-Pacific approach. And why European Union needs to have an Indo-Pacific approach? Because if European Union is trading with Asia, its trade would pass through Indian Ocean and then the Pacific. All right, ऐसा होगा. So then Indo-Pacific, if that is the future, European Union also is interested there, and it would also be looking for partners. Which kind of partners? Partners with whom it shares interests, or partners with whom it shares values. So thereby, here India figures prominently in the Indo-Pacific approach of European Union, which it has declared. So that is another area of cooperation, where we can have specific kinds of cooperation. For example, cooperation in the area of maritime security. For example, in combating piracy. All right, in combating piracy. That is something that European Union proposes, that this is what we can do together. And we had seen in terms of Indian Ocean, when we are talking about Indian Ocean, we talked about piracy. Piracy being a transnational crime. So by definition, there is presence of multinational task force in this region. यहाँ पे है. All right. I had sent a handout on Indian Ocean. सबको मिल गया था ना? Both the batches. एक बैच के लोगों का कहना था कि शायद उनको नहीं मिला. तो सब अपलोड तो सब में हो गया इंडियन ओशन का हैंडआउट. हो गया है ना? Okay. So that is where we can cooperate in areas like combating piracy. Or European Union says in the Indian Ocean littoral states of Africa, where India and European Union can cooperate in the Indian Ocean littoral states of Africa. All right, that's a common strategic arena for both of them, right? Africa right next to Europe, Mediterranean, and then Africa, and India is linked by Africa through Indian Ocean. So that is what also European Union says, that Indian Ocean littoral states of Africa, there also India and European Union can cooperate. And then European Union says the future requires closer cooperation between, or efforts for closer cooperation between the law enforcement agencies of both sides. Law enforcement agencies of both sides. All right. So for example, that means Europol and CBI, right? Cooperation in law enforcement, between law enforcement agencies. In what context can you think of such a cooperation being effective? Bank robbery, cyber crimes, many other areas. All right. But mainly if you see, our focus is on economic offender fugitives. All right. बहुत सारे ऐसे लोग हैं जो पैसा लेके 9-2-11 हो रहे हैं यहाँ से, and they are going to different corners of the globe. So these kinds of cooperation between law enforcement agencies can be helpful in addressing these concerns. All right. The economic offenders who are becoming fugitives, right? And then, as you know, newer areas of cooperation. So European Union says, for example, India and European Union can benefit from technical cooperation against terrorism. Technical cooperation against terrorism. All right. What is technical cooperation against terrorism? Cooperation at FATF. Cooperation in, let's say, getting the CCIT, Comprehensive Convention Against International Terrorism, being approved at the UN. So these kinds of cooperation may be beneficial. And then cooperation on new and hybrid threats, new and hybrid threats. For example, cooperation in the area of cyber security. All right, cooperation in the area of cyber security. Right, so threats are not only physical, they are also now digital. All right, a part of countries harming each other's interests is not only Russia launching a war in Ukraine, but also Russia launched a massive cyber attack in places like Europe and in places like US. तो ये पार्ट है. अब इसको लड़ने का कोई तरीका हमारे पास एक कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव तरीका ग्लोबली नहीं है. So every country is saying that we should be looking at this as the future. How do we fight cyber security related issues? How do we fight not only cyber crimes, but also larger concerns regarding cyber security? So this basically can be suggested as the future of India-European Union relations, because this has been suggested in European Union Strategy Paper 2018 and adopted in large part in India-European Union Cooperation Plan. Enhancing strategic dialogue, interactions, number one. Cooperation in other regions where we can expand our cooperation, Central Asia and Afghanistan. Cooperation in larger Indo-Pacific, we can say this is larger geostrategic cooperation. Cooperation in the area of maritime security, so there can be specific issues like combating piracy. Indian Ocean littoral states of Africa can be one common theater where we can cooperate. Cooperation between law enforcement agencies, Europol and CBI. Technical cooperation against terrorism, or cooperation against combating in new and hybrid threats like cyber security. So that's basically what we see as the future. And ultimately we can say that these two sides are sides which share values as well as interests. So that's why this cooperation is much needed, right? We can say that we may have our own differences, but what we know is that in the long term we share values and interests. Values like democracy, democratic values. All right. Interests, multiple interests, as we have talked about: economic interests, trade, investments, strategic interests. So we can say thereby, for example, both sides stand for globally multipolarity, right? Europe is a partner of US, but that does not say everything else. Europe would like to have an independent identity. It would not like a world which is dominated by one power, two power. All right. So Europe also stands for multipolarity. India also stands for multipolarity, meaning multipolar global order. And both sides also then prefer multilateralism, meaning cooperation between multiple countries as a way of resolving global issues, global challenges. So one commonality of value can be how they preferred the global order to be. Both India and European Union stand for a multipolar global order, where multilateralism is the preferred way of resolving issues and challenges. So that is the commonality, right? Countries like US sometimes take a very unilateral stand. Countries like China are taking very unilateral stand because they think that they are too powerful. So thereby countries like India or countries of Europe generally stand for multilateralism and multipolarity, because they think that world is better served by power and capability being evenly distributed in the system rather than being concentrated in the hands of few countries, one or two countries. So that's also a commonality. So thereby we can see that in areas like trade, connectivity, so people like to bring China everywhere. So if you look at China, what we see is in terms of value, China can be largely said to represent, ये क्या था भाई, गूगल मैप क्लास में. All right, China represents authoritarian values. All right, so China and European Union's preferences are not going to match in the long term. And thereby what we see is that this multipolarity and multilateralism is a common preference for India and European Union, not China and European Union. When we see investments in connectivity, India has problems with the part of BRI which is CPEC. And why did European Union start what it called the Global Gateway Project? Because many countries in Europe, for example, Greece, Macedonia, Montenegro, have seen increasing Chinese investments. And thereby, they had asked help from European Union. European Union said कि हम आपको चाइना का कर्ज उतारने के लिए पैसे नहीं देंगे. But you can't keep on saying that. Ultimately, you would have to assist countries which are your members or which are your neighbors, right? So that's why they started with the Global Gateway Project. So their interests are equally threatened by what China is doing, right? China's BRI, China's investment in connectivity and infrastructure projects is a concern for India. It is also a concern for European Union. So that translates into cooperation on the basis of shared interests. Similarly, you will see another area economically of global and regional significance is the issue of supply chain diversity or supply chain diversification. So you will see that since 2020, both India and EU are making efforts to diversify away from China dominated supply chains for their own reasons, right? 2020 onward, there has been a significant change in thinking. India had its own specific problem with China, for example, problem at the LSE. So that's why India started thinking about decoupling itself from Chinese economy. A part of it is supply chain diversification. European Union also then realized that Chinese investments in Europe or larger volume of trade with China may not be in the long-term interest. So they also have been looking, especially in the context of COVID-19 related supply chain shock, on the issue of supply chain diversification. So we can say that on certain particular concerns on China, India and European Union can be partners. They can be partners in two areas as we have seen. One, connectivity and investment projects, and they can be partners in the other area of supply chain diversification. All right, come invest in India, help us in becoming a manufacturing hub as an alternative to China. So that is another way in which we can see the future working out in terms of commonality of values, which creates a space, ease of working together, which basically tells us that we can build common program of action together, and commonality of interests. Their economic interests and our economic interests do not fit with China's economic actions, right? So thereby there can be further cooperation even in the context of China. So in simple terms, many people prefer this. European Union can be a partner in balancing China. None of these things are automatic. ये हम इतना ही कह रहे हैं कि इस पे काम कर सकते हैं, इस पे काम करना पड़ेगा. ऐसा नहीं है कि ऑटोमेटिकली हो जाएगा, अपने आप हो जाएगा, right? So we have our own interests, we look at things in our own way, and thereby we can find opportunities for cooperation between both the sides in this matter also, in the context of China also. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to raise those questions. Otherwise, now we will simply look at two countries of Europe as an example of our relations in Europe. We will look at France as one country, right? So let's simply do some preliminaries. We define this relationship as a strategic partnership. ऑलराइट, हमारे लिए ये स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप है, एंड दिस इज द ओल्डेस्ट स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप दैट वी हैव. वी आइडेंटिफाई फ्रांस एज अ स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनर सिंस 1998. कुछ छूट गया? कनेक्टिविटी एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. तो बहुत सिंपल वर्ड्स मिस कर रहे हो. कनेक्टिविटी एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, मैं बहुत ज़्यादा कुछ टेक्निकल लाने की कोशिश नहीं कर रहा. कनेक्टिविटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पहले बात की थी हमने. क्या है इंडिया और यूरोपियन यूनियन के बीच में? कौन सी पार्टनरशिप है? कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव कनेक्टिविटी पार्टनरशिप लॉन्च्ड इन 2021, है ना. उसी बात को हम यहाँ चाइना के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ले आए. वही बात, वहां पे हमने यूरोपियन यूनियन और इंडिया की बात की, और लास्ट में हमने चाइना की बात की कि कैसे ये सारी जो चीजें हो रही हैं ये चाइना के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में रिलेवेंट हो सकती है. तो कनेक्टिविटी एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, कनेक्टिविटी एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर मिस भी कर जाओगे तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं होगी. ऑलराइट, कनेक्टिविटी याद रखना. Like what Mr. S. Jaishankar says, that the era is not of non-alignment but multi-alignment. अब multi-alignment कह ले, non-alignment कह ले, मेरे लिए एक ही चीज है. All right, it's only a matter of emphasis. And what is it? How do you ensure your strategic autonomy? How do you ensure flexibility and diversity of choices? Right? So समय समय की बात है, कभी हम non-alignment करते हैं, कभी हम multi-alignment करते हैं. Aim एक ही है, to diversify our choices, to diversify our options. जब दो लोग लड़ रहे हैं तो मल्टी अलाइनमेंट मेक्स सेंस, बिकॉज वहां पे दोनों लोगों से दोस्ती वुड नॉट बी द सेंस. दो लोग लड़ रहे हैं तो नॉन अलाइनमेंट मेक्स सेंस. आप बीच में हैं, आपके कुछ रिलेशन इससे भी हैं, कुछ रिलेशन इससे भी हैं. और जब ऐसा नहीं हो रहा हो, जब दो लोग नहीं लड़ रहे हो, तो आप क्या कह सकते हैं? सबसे रिलेशंस, मल्टी अलाइनमेंट. दोनों ही केस में आप क्या कर रहे हैं? यू आर ट्राइंग टू सिक्योर योर इंटरेस्ट, विच इज वॉट वी कैन गेट फ्रॉम दिस पार्टी, वॉट वी कैन गेट फ्रॉम दिस पार्टी, विदाउट गेटिंग इंटैंगल्ड इन देयर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स. So multi-alignment is possible in certain kinds of situations. Non-alignment is possible in or required in certain kinds of situations. Aim एक ही है, diversifying options, right? चलिए, so we define France as a strategic partner. We look at it as one of our oldest strategic partners. Thereby, we can say that this relationship is based on. And now remember, in some relations we said commonalities of civilizational and cultural linkages. Here we are saying commonalities of values, commonality of values and commonality of interests. What commonality of value can we have with France? What commonality of value can we have with France? Democracy, of course, at the broader level, but the words fraternity, liberty, equality, they generally are associated with the slogan of French Revolution, and they are values incorporated in our constitution also. So, not as direct as the relation between French Constitution, French Revolution and American Constitution, but certainly in terms of larger, broader values, we see commonality here, right? And what interests do we have in common? So again, these can be the areas which are drivers. So we have one shared interest, that is cooperation in security and defense. We have another shared interest which is cooperation in the area of technology, and we have another interest which we can say that there has been a larger geostrategic convergence between the two sides. All right. So when we say commonality of values, as all of you have said, we refer to common preferences like democracy or values of liberty, fraternity and equality. So these are some of the things that we can say are similar between us. But we also remember, go back in history. अब थोड़ा हिस्ट्री रिवाइज कर लो. The Mysore War or the Mysore Wars. We have in that particular period, that is largely a period globally क्या हो रहा है, दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है? there is a rivalry between France and Britain. So they are fighting in different parts of the world. अमेरिका में भी लड़ रहे हैं. तो यहां पे भी आप देखेंगे that the French are helping, all right? The French are helping the Indian side. For example, Tipu Sultan acquiring technological help from French, all right? French are present in some parts of India also. For example, we don't remember them as colonial powers, but they were. For example, Pondicherry, all right? So Pondicherry, if you see, the architecture in Pondicherry reflects French influence, all right? So we can say that historically also we may find certain elements of commonality where Indians and French have cooperated, right? ये अच्छा हुआ कि this did not become a French colony. तो हम फ्रेंच को उतने अच्छे से याद नहीं कर रहे होते जैसे हम ब्रिटेन को याद करते हैं एज अ एक्सप्लॉइटर, ऑलराइट? बट फ्रेंच ऑल्सो कंट्रोल्ड सर्टेन पार्ट्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. तो जहां जहां जिनकी कॉलोनी रही है वहां वहां उनका इन्फ्लुएंस और बात का रिलेशन है, बट देयर इज ऑल्सो अ सॉर्ट ऑफ बिटरनेस इन टेस्ट इन रिलेशनशिप. सो दैट इज what translates into certain preference. So again we can say that both India and France stand for a multipolar global order. For example, France, though it is part of NATO, it has criticized US. For example, it did not like US war in Iraq. All right? So US war in Iraq, it was criticized by France. So France has a different view when it comes to international relations. और वो एक व्यू इससे भी आता है कि फ्रांस, आजकल बहुत सारे लोग बड़ी आसानी से कह देते हैं कि ये फ्रांस को क्यों होना चाहिए सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में. ऑल राइट, फ्रांस इज नो लॉन्गर अ ग्रेट पावर. तो फ्रांस, both from the perspective of its preferences of value and its interest, prefers a multipolar global order. So does India, right? And both then support multilateralism. So that means France supports India's inclusion into United Nations Security Council. France itself is a permanent member of the Security Council, and France is perhaps our most comfortable partner when it comes to the aim of Security Council reform and India's candidature as a member of the United Nations Security Council. Or France supports India's inclusion into global groupings like NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. Or France supports India's inclusion into groups like MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime. MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime. So France is a partner which is comfortable with India at the global stage. We don't have competition. We don't have any contention. Thereby it becomes easier for us to cooperate. We are in many ways very, very similar, right? So that is one basis of our cooperation, right? Now, when we come to interests, what we see is that this is seen in terms of a common position on issues, like terrorism. All right. So that's one thing that is common between us in terms of interests, right? So for example, France supports India's efforts at obtaining a comprehensive convention on international terrorism at the UN, right? France has supported India's position in the context of terrorist events like Pathankot or Pulwama or Uri. And France, for example, is one country which largely would reflect India's position on Pakistan. All right, on Pakistan also. Not many countries would openly say what India would like them to say about Pakistan, but France generally has been critical of Pakistan and its role in promoting terrorism. All right. So common views, because India has also suffered from terrorism. In recent times, France has also suffered from terrorism. Many attacks which were called lone wolf attacks. सुना है आपने lone wolf attack? When individuals or group of individuals are involved in a terrorist attack and they are not directly linked with any larger terrorist group, right? They claim affiliation to the ideology, but they are acting on their own. तो उनको हम कहते हैं lone wolf attack. All right, they are not acting on as part of any larger organization. They are acting on their own, but they can claim ideological affiliation, that I am doing this because of or in support of, right? Lone wolf attacks. So France has faced a lot of lone wolf attacks in recent years. Terrorism. One example was the Charlie Hebdo massacre, all right, in which certain cartoonists in a journal called Charlie Hebdo were massacred by certain terrorists. And then in other urban places, किसी ने गाड़ी चढ़ा दी, किसी ने stabbing कर दी. So these are the kind of lone wolf attacks. So on terrorism, there is a common view, right? And then they have made it a part of their joint statements. Joint statement on terrorism, that they came up in 2016. All right. And then we move beyond this and we see that defense cooperation is seen in terms of certain long-standing exercises between the two sides. What kind of exercises? So you have Varun as the naval exercise, which is continuous since 1983. It started in 1983. You have Garud as the Air Force exercise, which is a long-standing exercise, right? And then you have examples of defense acquisition. So for example, if you see the old Mirage fighter planes, all right, old Mirage fighter planes most recently came in news in the context of the Balakot airstrikes. Mirage का इस्तेमाल किया था हमने. Mirage are of French origin. They are our old acquisition from France. And then in the newer times we have the well-known example of Rafale. All right. So the example of Rafale, that is defense acquisition, and then there is the example of Scorpion class submarines that we are buying from France, 6 of them, but they are being constructed, 3 of them in France, 3 of them in India. So there was an element of technology transfer involved in this also. For example, submarines called INS Kalavari, submarines called INS Khanderi, they are part of this project. All right, the construction of submarines based on French technology. And then in recent times we have focused on establishing regular dialogues. For example, we have established a national security dialogue with France, national security dialogue at the level of national security advisor. And we also have now put in place a regular defense dialogue at the level of defense ministers. So they have become dialogues, common position, common statements, defense acquisition, military exercises. They have become important part of cooperation between India and France. So this is one example of shared interest. All right, this is one example of shared interest. Now we also see that the other driver of relationship has been technology. In what sense? So there are many examples. For example, one is the area of space technology. So here we find examples like Megatropics. All right, Megatropics, a constellation of satellites that we launched in around 2011 to monitor condensation, precipitation, the water cycle in the tropics. All right. And then apart from Megatropics, we also launched a similar satellite mission called Trishna. All right, Trishna satellites. We have been working on what is called Ka band propagation, which is using the Ka band for communication. All right, आपने सुना होगा Ka band, Ku band, science and technology में सुना होगा. So Ka band propagation, we are working on communication systems based on Ka band, using Ka band in satellites. Or we use, for example, Argos, a Russian, a French radar system in our OceanSat. Argos, use of Argos instrument. Or we have other examples. We will find various other examples. For example, cooperation in international forums, cooperation at ITR. All right, ITR, international. ITR क्या है? Anyone? ट्रेड नहीं होगा टी से, या टेक्नोलॉजी की बात हो रही है. कोई थर्मोन्यूक्लियर करके एक्सपेरिमेंट सुना है आपने? हाँ, प्लाज्मा रिसर्च, पार्टिकल रिसर्च, थर्मोन्यूक्लियर रिसर्च के लिए जो इनिशिएटिव इंटरनेशनली, उसमें हम कोऑपरेट कर रहे हैं. इसके अलावा आप देखेंगे दैट फॉर एग्जांपल आवर GSAT series of satellites are launched from French facilities, right? Launched from French Guyana. All right, GSAT. बहुत सारी सैटेलाइट्स हम खुद ही लॉन्च करते हैं, राइट? PSLV से GSLV का इस्तेमाल करने की कोशिश भी कर रहे हैं. बट जनरली ट्रेडिशनली जो हेवियर सैटेलाइट्स हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल GSAT सीरीज ऑफ सैटेलाइट 16, 17, दैट वी लॉन्च फ्रॉम फ्रेंच गयाना, विच इज अ फ्रेंच facility. All right, and then you have, as somebody is suggesting, an example of cooperation in the area of International Solar Alliance, which was launched in the year 2015, and that was launched at Paris, COP at Paris. That is where it was launched in 2015, and India and France were partners to start with. They were the initial partners in the International Solar Alliance, as Adeshwar is saying. All right, स्कॉर्पियन नहीं, स्कॉर्पियन सबमरीन. राफेल की स्पेलिंग अगर RAFAEL है तो वो लिख लें. Another commonality can be both are highly vulnerable and affected by terrorism, and thus because of this they have come close in defense. राज चौहान कहते हैं ब्रेक. Okay, take a break, please take a break. साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी में नहीं किया था? ITR, इंटरनेशनल थर्मोन्यूक्लियर एक्सपेरिमेंटल रिएक्टर. हाँ, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they are from the different batch. They are from the same batch. इनका कहना है साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी में हो गया है. You are in the different batch. You are from RB2. So they may be from different batch. Or maybe you missed the class. चलो, इंटरनेशनल थर्मोन्यूक्लियर एक्सपेरिमेंटल रिएक्टर. ठीक है, इंडिया एंड फ्रांस आर पार्टिसिपेट. लेट्स कम बैक आफ्टर द ब्रेक. लेट्स स्टार्ट. चलिए आगे बैठ जाइए. लेट्स स्टार्ट. सो अभय सेज इंटरनेशनल माइग्रेशन विल बी कवर्ड इन IR क्लासेस. हाउ विल बी कवर दोज टॉपिक्स? विच टॉपिक्स भाई? इंटरनेशनल माइग्रेशन, ये अलग से टॉपिक कहां पे है IR में या किसी भी सब्जेक्ट में? कहां पे क्वेश्चन आते हैं? सोसाइटी में एक क्वेश्चन आया माइग्रेशन का आपने इंटरनल. अब जब हम हर जगह पे कह रहे हैं, एवरी प्लेस वी आर सेइंग दैट इंडियंस आर वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट माइग्रेटिंग कम्युनिटी. बाहर जा रहे हैं, जिस भी देश में हम जा रहे हैं वहां कह रहे हैं कि लोग हैं यहाँ पे. तो आपको ये याद रखना पड़ेगा कि एक टॉपिक होता है इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन में जिसको कहते हैं डायस्पोरा. सो हम दुनिया भर के इंटरनेशनल माइग्रेशन से कंसर्न नहीं है, हम इंडिया के माइग्रेशन से कंसर्न है, इंडिया का इंटरनेशनल माइग्रेशन. एंड दैट इज जनरली कवर्ड अंडर डायस्पोरा. वी डोंट टॉक अबाउट माइग्रेशन विच इज अ सोशियोलॉजिकल इशू, वो थोड़ी आपकी बात हुई होगी, वही कॉन्सेप्ट्स लगते हैं इसमें भी, पर कॉन्सेप्ट्स वाली बात नहीं है. डायस्पोरा, डायस्पोरा रिक्वायर्स ए अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ वेयर द डायस्पोरा इज स्प्रेड, व्हाट इज देयर स्टेटस, व्हाट आर देयर चैलेंजेस, राइट. तो वहां पे हम कवर करेंगे अब है, राइट. अगर इंटरनेशनल माइग्रेशन की बात है तो हम जनरली उसको डायस्पोरा के फॉर्म में देखते हैं, इंडियन डायस्पोरा के फॉर्म में. ऑल राइट, तो ऐसा होगा. चलिए, सो इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस और ITER, इंटरनेशनल थर्मोन्यूक्लियर एक्सपेरिमेंटल रिएक्टर, इस तरह के कोऑपरेशन के एग्जाम्पल है इंडिया और फ्रांस के बीच में. सिमिलरली यू कैन ऑल्सो ऐड हियर इन 2009 इंडिया एंड फ्रांस in 2009 signed a civil nuclear agreement. All right, India and France signed what? A civil nuclear agreement in 2009. So thereby French company called Areva, all right, a French company called Areva is a supplier at the nuclear power plant which is being constructed at Jaitapur. All right, nuclear power plant which is being constructed at Jaitapur. All right, so this is also another example of cooperation in technology. Civil nuclear agreement of 2009, and there Areva, which is a French supplier, being partner at the Jaitapur nuclear power plant. All right, so that's another example of technology. Now let's move forward and let's see that what else is driving the relationship. So if you want, for example, you can see that when it comes to trade, India and France trade was around 12.5 billion euros in 2021, in which India's exports to France was around 6.7 billion euros. We also say that there are more than 1,000 French companies which are active, present in India, and French companies have opened more than 25 research and development centers in India. All right, so this is the economic aspect of cooperation, which is reasonably fine but not the major driver of relationship as of now. 12.5 billion euros of trade, 6.7 billion euros of exports to France, 1,000 French companies being present in India, and French companies opening more than 25 research and development centers in India. So this is the economic presence of France in India. Now let's see what is the larger geostrategic convergence, all right, in India and France. One, of course, they had been keen on cooperating in the Indian Ocean region. So that's a commonly shared interest that these sides traditionally had. Why? Because France is called a resident power. France is called a resident power in the Indian Ocean region. France is a resident power. So thereby it is argued that France is an ideal partner for India in the Indian Ocean region. What do we mean by resident power? France has its own territories like Reunion. All right, France has bases in places like Djibouti. So thereby at any point in time there is French deployment, French forces are present in the Indian Ocean region to the tune of around 20,000. If you see, there is another interesting fact. For example, nearly 40% of Reunion's population is of Indian origin. All right, it is of Indian origin, right? But we understand that French Navy, French military personnel are present in Indian Ocean region. So thereby, based on commonality of values, commonality of interest, and the fact that France has a presence in the Indian Ocean region, it is considered to be an ideal partner for India in the Indian Ocean region. And then this has translated into, in the current times, the Indo-Pacific approach. So French Indo-Pacific approach puts India at the center. So there is one country which, if you see, has been making statements like we are ready to provide India whatever it needs, or which has been clearly taking sides, meaning it has been siding with India on the question, let's say, related with China, right? So there also we can say that among the European countries who have Indo-Pacific approach, the French Indo-Pacific approach keeps India at the center, clearly identifies India as the major partner there. All right. So this is what is driving the relationship, and that means that there is further chance of closer security and technology cooperation in this relation. For example, one thing that you will notice that when AUKUS was signed, AUKUS is Australia, UK, US agreement. One particular project in AUKUS was the support in nuclear powered submarine to Australia by US and UK. They are talking about integrating their military industrial defense complex. So prior to that, France was in negotiations with Australia for a submarine program, and France did not like it. That particular submarine program was nixed. So in that context, we think that here security plus technology can be seen in terms of cooperation in, for example, nuclear powered technology. So it's very clear that this is what is driving the relations, and the elements of relations we have already seen. So, and this would remain a driver of the relation. Thereby we will also see that, for example, apart from their bilateral dialogue, they in recent times have conducted trilaterals like India, Australia, France dialogue, trilateral dialogue on cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. That dialogue is there. Thereby we can also make a case for France's inclusion in the Quad. Alright, we can say that Quad would benefit by the inclusion of France. Alright, or we can say that any conception of Quad like cooperation, like Quad plus, needs to include France. It has a logical basis that it is located in the Indian Ocean region. It has an Indo-Pacific approach which defines India centrally in that approach. So thereby we should advocate French inclusion in the Quad. And you see, even in Quad, we find that Australia, US and Japan are on one side, India is on the other side in terms of preferences. Alright, it does not mean dushmani, it means preferences. किसको किसके साथ ज़्यादा comfort है. So we can also draw other partners there, and that can be France. Either Quad or Quad plus like formulations in the Indo-Pacific would benefit from French inclusion. In any case, we see trilateral dialogue between India, Australia and France already taking place. So this would drive the relation. So we can say that the relationship would benefit from focusing on trade engagements, all right. So this relationship should focus on trade engagements. That depends to a large extent on the success of India European Union broad-based trade and investment agreement. But we remember currently France is the chair of European Union. All right, that's one thing. And second thing that we can benefit from is greater people to people contacts. All right, so one can be increasing tourism. So for example, every year around 500,000 Indians visit France. All right, थोड़ा बहुत हमारे पास पैसा आया तो हम जाना चाहते हैं दुनिया भर. कहाँ जाएंगे? पेरिस, एफिल टावर के सामने फोटो खिंचाएंगे. होता है ये. तो 500,000 Indians go to France, but the same number to India is around 100,000 French. 100 to 200,000 French are coming to India. So tourism, एक मतलब है क्या बढ़ाना है हमको? Tourism. Second, we see that, for example, when we talked about Australia, आपको याद होगा, we said commonality of interest or values between India and Australia includes education relations. Australia emerging as an important education destination for Indians. Oxford, Cambridge नहीं जा पाए तो कहाँ जाना है? Australia. You will get the Australian degree. So you may have noticed, यही करना होता है IR में. You may have noticed the foreign minister is in Australia. He gave a speech in which he said that we look forward to cooperation with Australia in the sector of education under our new education policy. So that is something that you do. जब आगे जाओ तो इन चीजों को देखो, नोट कर लो. जैसे इसमें क्या हुआ, न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी इज अ डोमेस्टिक प्रायोरिटी, डोमेस्टिक पॉलिसी, एंड देयर वी आर bringing it to IR, new education policy. Foreign Minister said Australia may be a prominent partner in new education policy, which is what we are right now thinking about, promoting collaboration between Indian institutions and foreign institutions. We are thinking about modalities of allowing foreign institutions to open their branches in India. All right. So with Australia, we said that is one cooperation, education. So similarly, here also in France also, we had a target of 10,000 students. All right. We have achieved that target. Now our target is to increase this number of student exchange to 20,000. So student exchange is another way of enhancing people to people ties. All right. One is tourism, increase tourism, which is already flourishing. And second is student exchanges, right? Identifying France as an education destination. The only problem is we are comfortable with English speaking countries. France, if you go to France, they are very keen on French. उनको अपनी ज़बान से बहुत प्यार है, right? All of us like our language, right? Some people would think this should be the national language, that should be the national language, or why people speak in Hindi, why people speak in. As a teacher, the problem is always this: if you speak in English, there is a certain section which will get angry. They will not be comfortable. If you speak in Hindi, there is a certain section which will say, why are you speaking in Hindi? Which is understandable. Not everybody speaks Hindi. All right. So teacher kya kare? All right. So both sections have to understand that whatever teacher is doing is to balance various interests. Right. So it happens. So similarly, France, if you go French language, that is something that is the problem. Not the problem, but for example, I was in France, so I pronounced a certain word in a certain way. मैंने पता पूछा उनसे, तो उन्होंने मुझे जवाब नहीं दिया. जवाब क्या नहीं दिया, उन्होंने मेरी तरफ देखा भी नहीं, because I was pronouncing the French word incorrectly. They are so insistent on there. Then you learn कि आपको पहली चीज, कहीं भी आप जाओ, अगर आपको वो भाषा नहीं आती हो तो उसके 2-3 शब्द सीख लो. वो क्या? सॉरी, थैंक यू. And start with the word in that language for sorry, and then say I don't speak French, for example. Then they would be able to, then they will be willing to help you. But if you think that कि हर कोई हिंदी बोले, हर कोई इंग्लिश बोले, हर कोई ये बोले वो बोले, तो everybody would feel offended, right? So उन्होंने मेरी मदद नहीं की, तो फिर then I learned कि first I speak some words in French, सीखा sorry thank you कैसे बोलते हैं, and then that helped me. Right now I don't remember, it was way back, right? I remember, for example, from German, a word called Entschuldigung. I don't understand the meaning of that now, but I remember using it. It is either sorry or thank you. Danke is thank you in German. All right, danke. Right? Entschuldigung is excuse me. Excuse me. So these are the kinds of words that you remember. French is very difficult to pronounce. All right, French is very difficult to pronounce. So basically that is what we are saying. We should increase familiarity between two sides. All right. So for example, language training. Many, if you are aware, in cities like Delhi or in provincial capitals also, many institutes, many foreign consulates and embassies have language training institutes, or they sponsor language training program. दिल्ली में तो बहुत सारे एम्बेसीज अपने लैंग्वेज और कल्चर सेंटर चलाते हैं. आपको सीखने का शौक है तो आप जाइए, सीखिए. राइट, दैट इज वन वे ऑफ कॉन्करिंग द वर्ल्ड. हमारे पास वी हैव 1.4 बिलियन पीपल, सो वी शुड मेक अ टारगेट. क्या टारगेट? दैट वी वुड मेक एटलीस्ट 5 crore पीपल प्रोफिशिएंट इन वन फॉरेन लैंग्वेज, है ना. 5 करोड़ को हम फ्रेंच सिखा देते हैं, 5 करोड़ को हम स्पेनिश सिखा देते हैं. अंग्रेजी तो सबको आती ही है, पीपल नो इंग्लिश. 5 करोड़ को रशियन सिखा देते हैं, 20 करोड़ को चाइनीज सिखा देते हैं. ऑल राइट. हाँ, इस तरह से पूरी दुनिया पे कब्जा कर सकते हैं. And that is one way of conquering the world, rather than saying that, हम आएंगे और हम कब्जा कर लेंगे. नहीं. We will make our travel easier. All right? दुनिया भर में हमारी acceptability को हम बढ़ाएंगे by learning a lot of languages. Right? चलिए, बहुत मुश्किल होता है. खैर, इससे मुझे याद आया कि in the case of European Union also you can have one example, and that is in the case of European Union that 50,000 Indian students are studying in various universities of European Union. All right, European Union, they are studying in 50,000. They are studying in European universities. 50,000 Indian students. For example, around 7,000 of them receive scholarships, like the scholarships which is called Erasmus. All right, Erasmus Mundus scholarship. And India and European Union have a dialogue on multilingualism. All right, so that is one aspect of people to people ties. ये example आप रख सकते हैं, one aspect of people to people ties in the case of European Union. 50,000 students in European institutions, universities. Europe offers multiple scholarships. अगर आपका interest कभी आए beyond UPSC to take yourself towards higher education, Europe can be a good destination. So apply for scholarships like Erasmus Mundus, right? 7,000 students get Erasmus Mundus scholarship, right? Example इसको कैसे यूज करते हैं हम? As people to people. इतना भी मुश्किल नहीं है, अभी बाद में जाने की सोचना, अभी से प्लान बनाने लगे दोनों मिलके. मतलब अभी फ्यूचर काफी दूर है. So this is example of people to people ties between India and European Union, right? Chaliye, if you have any questions you can ask, otherwise we look at the next country, that is UK. India and UK relations. All right, so when we say France has a naval base in Djibouti, France has a base in Djibouti, right? Okay, chaliye, India and UK. So when we talk about India and UK, again we can use the same terms. What? Commonality of values and commonality of interests, right? Values में हम history को भी ला सकते हैं. What kind of values? Again, democracy. All right, what kind of values? Democracy. We have Westminster style of democracy, which is based on the British system of democracy, right? For example, Britain sometimes is called home of democracy, where democracy originated. I don't know why, but still ऐसा कहते हैं तो हम मान लेते हैं. हम कहते हैं इंडिया इज वर्ल्ड्स लार्जेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी. फिर हमारे कुछ लोग कहेंगे नहीं ऐसा कैसे? वी हैड डेमोक्रेसी इन द एंशिएंट टाइम्स. ऑल राइट, वी हैड द सिस्टम ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी इन द अर्लियर टाइम्स. चलो, ये सबकी अपनी अपनी बात हो सकती है क्लेम की. इनकी भी बात मान लेते हैं, हमारी भी बात मान लेते हैं. ऑल राइट, एंड वी सी दैट देयर इज अ कॉमनैलिटी. Both of us have democratic values as our preference in the current times. All right, and then for example, the English language itself. India is among the largest English speaking countries in the world. So whether we like it or not, exam किस medium में देना है? English medium में. क्यों? Because vernacular medium or Hindi medium generally is in disadvantage in this examination. All right, so English, why English is still dominant? Because it has utility. We have made it to be dominant. Utility है, right? चलो utility पहचान लेते हैं. Globally हमको opportunity भी दे. For example, why we are strong in services sector is because we had a large pool of English speaking people. जैसे भी बोलते हैं हम English, right? We speak in our own accent, but we speak English. We understand English generally better than most parts of the world, right? So इसीलिए सर्विसेज सेक्टर में फॉर एग्जांपल हमको फायदा मिला. अब चाइना वाले भी अपने बच्चों को अंग्रेजी में कोचिंग दे रहे हैं. ऑलराइट, जैसे हमारे यहाँ छोटे छोटे शहरों में इंग्लिश स्पीकिंग कोर्सेस चलते हैं. किसी ने कुछ नहीं किया तो क्या किया? इंग्लिश स्पीकिंग क्लासेस चला ली. ऑलराइट, इन इंडियन सिनेमा ऑल्सो देयर आर लॉट्स ऑफ कैरेक्टर्स, बट दैट इज वन कॉमनैलिटी दैट वी हैव. इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज फॉर गुड और फॉर बैड. सो वी कैन से कॉमनैलिटी ऑफ वैल्यूज. और कुछ चीजें हम और कहते हैं, जैसे बहुत बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के बारे में बात करते हैं. For example, rule of law, ideas such as rule of law. These are commonality of values, right? What are commonality of interest? What is it that Britain can give us? So one for us is, first of all, we have diasporic interests in UK. We have a large number of people of Indian origin in UK, or a large number of moving population. All right, moving population on the move, families, professionals, businessmen, students who are traveling to UK every year, right? So that is one interest that we have primarily, moving population, right? Another is interest in the area of economic engagements, interest in the area of economic engagements, right? Meaning both trade and investments, trade and investments. Now we also have interests in developing strategic cooperation, right? Interest in developing strategic cooperation. Though we define this relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership, right? So you will remember 2021 India and UK held a summit. क्यों याद करेंगे? Because everybody knows Boris Johnson. All right, Boris Johnson came to India. India had invited him to be a chief guest of the Republic Day parade in 2021, but at that point in time, because of difficulties of COVID in UK, Mr. Johnson could not come. Then in April he came, and there was a summit between India and UK. All right, so there we defined our relationship to be a strategic partnership. All right, comprehensive strategic partnership, and we adopted a vision called Vision 2030 vision for this comprehensive strategic partnership. There we identified these areas of cooperation as our drivers. So let's understand few of them, right? So for example, there are around 1.6% of UK's population is of Indian origin. So जिसको आपको ऑनलाइन आपको माइग्रेशन का कंसर्न था, इस तरह की चीजें हम जानते हैं, राइट? दिस इज ऑल्सो डेटा फैक्ट अबाउट डायस्पोरा. 1.6% of UK's population, it accounts for 6% of UK's GDP. Indians contribute 6% of UK's GDP, right? And then we have Indian origin politicians like Suella, पहले उनको कहते थे फर्नांडिस, अब कहते हैं सुएला ब्रेवरमैन. ऑल राइट, नाम तो सुना होगा आपने. क्यों सुना? क्योंकि इन्होंने कहा कि शी इज नॉट इन फेवर ऑफ अ स्पेशल माइग्रेशन एंड मोबिलिटी डील विद इंडिया बिकॉज इंडियंस ओवरस्टे, आते हैं और रुक जाते हैं, तो उनको फिर कहना पड़ता है अतिथि तुम कब जाओगे. दैट इज वन थिंग दैट is issue of migration, right? But we are taking her as an example of Indian origin people acquiring high position in UK, right? For example, Alok Sharma. So Alok Sharma right now is the head of COP26. COP26 was hosted by UK. आपको याद होगा ग्लासगो में, right? So chair of COP26 was Alok Sharma, right? It's a position similar to a cabinet position, right? So he is also in a high position, Alok Sharma of Indian origin, right? And then you already have heard names like Rishi Sunak, member of parliament right now, but also contender for prime minister. Or in the previous government, Preeti Patel was the home secretary, which right now is Suella Braverman. All right. So these are people of Indian origin who have acquired significance in society in UK. All right, around 15 members of UK Parliament, lower house, are of Indian origin. So this is the aspect of diaspora that we see there. Similarly, you will see multiple Indians are high net worth individuals in UK. For example, Lakshmi Mittal, all right, the steel tycoon. Many other examples are there, right? So this is one of our population. And then moving population means, and in any given year, one of the countries where large number of people from India are moving are families to going to UK, family reunion, husband hai, wife जा रही है, wife है, husband जा रहा है, so on and so forth, right? Or students or business persons. So this is one route on which there is lot of movement. Lot of Indians every year travel to UK for different purposes, right? So that's one of our interests, safeguarding the interests of people of Indian origin, but more importantly, safeguarding the interest of moving population, right? Economic engagement, if you see, trade according to British data in 2021 between India and UK was 23 billion Great Britain pound, all right, 23 billion Great Britain pound, right? So that is a trade, meaning in Europe, in the larger European region, Britain has been one of the leading trading partners for us, all right? For example, it also is among top 4 investors in India, all right? And India is among top 3, all right? India is among top 3 investors in UK. In some years, India has been second largest investor in UK. Thereby, India is the largest employment, or Indian investments are source of largest employment in UK, right? So that is where we have now come to. Being ruled by UK, this year we displaced UK from the 5th position as ranking of global GDPs goes. Indian investments in UK have been increasing, so we are among the top 3 investors in UK. And Indian investments in some years are responsible for generating highest number of jobs in UK. More than 100,000 jobs in UK are generated by Indian investments. So ये जब हम कहते हैं, इसका मतलब यही होता है, either Lakshmi Mittal acquiring Arcelor like steel companies, all right, or Chorus like steel companies in UK. हमारे कुछ लोगों ने वहां की इंडस्ट्रीज को एक्वायर किया, और मिस्टर टाटा एक्वायरिंग Jaguar, all right? So these are examples of how Indian investments are generating jobs in the UK. But generally, trade and investment relations have been reasonable, as we can say, not very high, not very low. In this context, what we see is what becomes important in terms of future is negotiations on India-UK free trade agreement, which is right now going on. All right, right now going on. So before that, we simply understand why this free trade agreement. Why UK-India free trade agreement? Why Vijay Mallya overstaying in UK? सही है. चलिए, so we basically know that there is something called Brexit which happened in 2016. All right, when we are talking about European Union, we had said that there is something called Euroscepticism, meaning there is a section of population or political group in every European Union country which questions the benefit of being a member of the European Union. उनको पसंद नहीं है यूरोपियन यूनियन का मेंबर होना. हर देश में ऐसे लोग हैं, ऐसे पॉलिटिकल सेक्शन है. In UK, there was a concerted campaign to get UK out of European Union. And this campaign then came to a head when in 2016, the then Prime Minister of UK, Mr. David Cameron, decided to hold a referendum on the issue. All right, referendum on the issue. So when referendum was taking place, not many people believed in the run-up to referendum, not many people believed that UK would leave the European Union. ऐसा बहुत सारे लोगों को लगता था कि ऐसा नहीं होगा. Most of the reasonable people would say this would not happen because UK gains from market access to European Union. UK's economic heft globally is aided by being a part of the European Union. All right. So European Union and UK would not divorce each other. But ऐसा हो गया. The referendum results were surprising. So in that referendum, UK decided to leave the European Union. It was a close vote. So thereby then ensued the process of leaving the European Union 2016 onward. So it was, referendum was under the Prime Minister David Cameron. Then David Cameron resigned. Then came Theresa May as the Prime Minister. She negotiated with European Union the terms of UK's exit from the European Union. All right. So out of that came two deals. Brexit deal, मतलब Brexit कैसे होगा? So that involved how much UK should pay to European Union in dues. कितना पैसा उनको देना है यूरोपियन यूनियन को, जो उनका बाकी था यूरोपियन यूनियन के ऊपर. या फिर इश्यूज लाइक व्हाट वुड बी द नेचर ऑफ बॉर्डर रिलेशंस कैसे होंगे यूके और यूरोपियन यूनियन के बीच में. कहां है यूके और यूरोपियन यूनियन का बॉर्डर? एनी आइडिया? ऑन आयरलैंड. देयर इज एन आइलैंड कॉल्ड आयरलैंड. आयरलैंड has two parts. One, Northern Ireland, which is part of UK, and southern part of the Ireland is Republic of Ireland. Republic of Ireland is a member of European Union, and Northern Ireland is part of UK, which is now no longer a member of European Union. All right, so that's where we see that the next agreement, Brexit agreement negotiate किया. Next agreement था on the future of relations between UK and European Union on issues like rights of the citizens of UK in European Union and European Union in UK. Terms of trade conditions between UK and European Union for the future. All right, क्या arrangements होंगे? So two agreements. First agreement negotiated by 2018 itself, उसके approval में बहुत time लगा. Second agreement was negotiated and finalized by December 2021. All right, so that is something that happened. So Theresa May negotiated an agreement, could not get it passed through the parliament. So उनको resign करना पड़ा. फिर कौन आए? Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson also negotiated his agreement with the European Union, could not get it passed by the parliament. तो देखो एक एग्जाम्पल यहाँ पे पार्लियामेंट्री डेमोक्रेसी का है. वो क्या? प्राइम मिनिस्टर है, प्राइम मिनिस्टर की गवर्नमेंट है, मेजॉरिटी है, लेकिन द प्राइम मिनिस्टर एंड द गवर्नमेंट इज नॉट एबल टू गेट द लेजिस्लेशन पास्ड बाय द पार्लियामेंट. सो दैट इज द पावर ऑफ द लेजिस्लेचर. ऑल राइट, इसीलिए हमारा एक क्रिटिसिज्म क्या है एंटी डिफेक्शन लॉ को लेके, दैट इट लिमिट्स द चॉइसेस ऑफ द लेजिस्लेटर. इंडिविजुअल लेजिस्लेटर, इंडिविजुअल एमपी एमएलए अगर अपनी अंतरात्मा की आवाज में वोट करना चाहें तो वो पॉसिबल नहीं है, क्योंकि उनकी अंतरात्मा इज अंडर द व्हाट इज कॉल्ड द प्रोविजंस ऑफ एंटी डिफेक्शन law or act. So those who are interested in parliamentary democracy. So Boris Johnson also resigned. Elections के बाद फिर से कौन आए? बोरिस जॉनसन ही आ गए. Now this time with a single majority in the parliament. So finally the agreement with UK was approved by European Union, was approved by UK Parliament, and this then meant that in January 2021, all right, Brexit finally was over. तो डिसाइड तो कर लिया इन्होंने 16 में छोड़ने का, लेकिन छोड़ नहीं पाए 21 तक. ऑल राइट, इनको लगा था बहुत आसानी से कर लेंगे, पर ऐसा हुआ नहीं. बोलो, चेहरे पे क्वेश्चन मार के कुछ बोल नहीं रहे हो. राइट, सो देन आफ्टर दैट व्हाट दे नेगोशिएटेड वाज पोस्ट ब्रेक्सिट एग्रीमेंट, जो हो गया दिसंबर 2021 तक. राइट, सो वी अंडरस्टैंड दैट. नाउ दिस इज द प्रोसेस ऑफ ब्रेक्सिट, यूके लीविंग द यूरोपियन यूनियन. आर्ग्यूमेंट वही थे. What were the arguments? Anti-globalization sentiments. क्यों Brexit हुआ? Because this was the time of anti-globalization sentiment, which is what? When we say anti-globalization, there are two arguments to it. In the initial phase, globalization was seen to be associated with liberalization, privatization, globalization. In countries like India, the debate was that poor get poorer because of these kinds of policies, and rich get richer. And ultimately, it's a West-driven process, so developed countries are benefiting from globalization. That's one argument that is anti-globalization. Developing countries argument, that developed countries are benefiting. Now, by the time we come to the last decade, 2010, 2021, we see another element of anti-globalization that is seen in developed countries. अब developed countries क्या कह रही हैं? वो ये कह रही हैं, पहला, you see, not everybody equally benefited from globalization. For example, those who were educated, those who had technical education, benefited from globalization of finance, globalization of services. जो IT सेक्टर में काम करता था, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जिसके पास IT की डिग्री थी, इंजीनियरिंग की डिग्री थी, उसको फायदा हुआ. जो फाइनेंस में काम करता था उसको फायदा हुआ. बड़े शहरों में रहने वालों को फायदा हुआ. ये वेस्ट में लोग कह रहे हैं. That not everybody benefited equally from globalization. So there were certain people who were left out even in the West. दूसरा related argument क्या है? वो ये है that by globalization, manufacturing jobs shifted away from developed countries. तो इसलिए एक मेजर आर्गुमेंट आप हमें सुनते होंगे कि ये इंडिया वाले, चाइना वाले हमारी नौकरी ले रहे हैं, आउटसोर्सिंग हो रही है, राइट, आउटसोर्सिंग ऑफ जॉब्स हो रहा है. तो ये सेंटिमेंट थे एंटी ग्लोबलाइजेशन इन दी वेस्ट, when people are arguing that we have not benefited by globalization. All right. Second argument, anti-establishment. Anti-establishment argument क्या होता है? Anti-elite, anti-establishment argument. हमेशा आपको दिखता है कि ये जो ऊपर वाला है, हमारे नेता चोर हैं. मैं नहीं कह रहा, I don't use such strong words, but generally एक common sensical argument बहुत सारे लोग देते हैं, right? So ये anti-elite, anti-establishment कि भाई जो जिनको हमने चुना उन्होंने हमारे इंटरेस्ट को पूरा नहीं किया. एंटी एलिट, एंटी एस्टैब्लिशमेंट सेंटिमेंट्स. थर्ड इसके साथ, ये दोनों इकोनॉमिक पॉइंट्स हैं. थर्ड इसके साथ क्या है? थर्ड पॉइंट इज एथनिक पॉइंट. द आर्ग्यूमेंट इज दैट ग्लोबलाइजेशन प्रमोट्स इमिग्रेशन. और इमिग्रेशन से क्या होता है? पीपल कम एंड टेक अवे आवर जॉब्स, पीपल कम एंड ओवरस्टे. यही आर्ग्यूमेंट है, ये बहुत पॉपुलर आर्ग्यूमेंट हुआ था. पीपल कम एंड डिल्यूट आवर कल्चर, है ना. तो फिर इसके साथ कल्चरल आर्ग्यूमेंट आ जाता है. And generally, who are the people most susceptible to these kinds of arguments? Low income groups, middle classes, old people. All right, they would be more susceptible to these arguments. कि बाहर ही आ रहे हैं, हमारी नौकरी ले रहे हैं. All right, गरीबी बढ़ रही है because they feel, एक logical reason भी है. When you are old, you are more susceptible to any changes in income. All right, आपके पास एक income support होता नहीं है generally, so you are more susceptible to economic downturns. So these were the arguments. And the anger was against European Union because, as we said, European Union was accused of being too bureaucratic in nature. Thereby, those who supported Brexit argued that UK would benefit from being out of European Union rather than being inside the European Union. Meaning what? We would be able to take our own decisions. ये argument था उनका. तो हमेशा इस तरह के argument बहुत simple लगते हैं कि ये होगा, उसके बाद ये हो जाएगा. Right? So ultimately people bought into these arguments and they decided to come out of UK. Right? So Brexit हो गया. अब Brexit हो गया, इससे हमारा क्या लेना देना? तो बहुत सारा argument था कि what would happen because of Brexit. So some people say UK's economy will suffer. So it happened, Great Britain pound जो है in the initial period went down, the value went down. UK's economy saw a shrinking in its growth. ऐसा हुआ. Some people said that European Union would lose out on the expertise of UK. Some people said European Union would become much more unified क्योंकि UK की हमेशा एक अलग राय होती थी. For example, it does not use euro, right? So various arguments. But in that time, there were arguments like India would benefit. For example, SBI conducted a survey or CII conducted a survey in which it was reported that Indian companies may have greater opportunities in a post-Brexit Britain. All right. In any case, we are a larger investor there. Some people said that we may have better opportunities in terms of shaping immigration outcomes. Right. One argument in UK was that if we allow European Union's migration norms to be applied, what would happen? Polish people, Romanian people would flood UK market. Right. तो अगर आप यूरोपियन यूनियन से बाहर आ गए तो इसका मतलब यह है कि यू आर कंट्रोलिंग द इमिग्रेशन ऑफ पीपल फ्रॉम यूरोप टू यूके, बट देन यू आर नॉट गोइंग टू डू योर ओन वर्क. आप अपना काम तो खुद से करेंगे नहीं, यू विल ऑलवेज रिक्वायर वर्कर्स. तो हमको लगता है कि we will have better opportunities in the UK market, especially in the UK services market. So that is what people said. These surveys said that Indian companies would benefit in terms of better opportunities in UK, or India may have the opportunity to shape immigration related understanding with UK. All right. So that is what we will do. And then gradually what we see is, and this is what we used to teach also, what would happen? UK may offer a free trade agreement. What would happen? European Union would also offer a free trade agreement. ऐसा ही हुआ. UK also offered a free trade agreement and European Union also offered a free trade agreement, right? So then in 2021 we decided, as part of 2030 vision, we decided to obtain a free trade agreement, right? And we have been negotiating it. We started negotiations early in 2022. Negotiation start कर दिया हमने. The idea was we will obtain an early harvest agreement. Early harvest agreement क्या होता है? So when you are negotiating a large agreement, you may sign an early agreement in areas where it is easier to make progress. जहां पे भी आप progress कर रहे हैं वहां पे आपने agreement sign कर लिया. पहला इसको early harvest agreement कहते हैं. early harvest पहले कर लिया. And ultimately we said that we will be negotiating the agreement, and by Diwali, which is this month, India and UK would have a Diwali gift, which is a free trade agreement. हम free trade agreement negotiate कर लेंगे, ऐसा हमारा मानना था, पर ऐसा हुआ नहीं. And we see now our differences are very clear. What are our differences? So our differences are in areas where we had earlier differences also. So for example, tariffs. For example, tariff, we have the difficulty in the area of spirits. Again, UK को क्या बेचना है? शराब. For example, like Scotch. So UK's demand is reduction in tariffs. ठीक है ये. Second, हमें क्या प्रॉब्लम है? हमें चाहिए सर्विसेज में एक्सेस. So migration and mobility we want to be included as part of this agreement. Migration and mobility, right? ठीक. Okay, what is it that is another sticking point? UK is making a demand. What demand? UK's demand of its companies being permitted to bid for contracts or project contracts in India. ये UK चाहता है that India should open up its market. For example, if there are construction projects, UK companies should be allowed to bid. All right. So these are difficult issues which have emerged. We don't see that on migration mobility there is going to be any deal. That's why you heard the statement of the Home Secretary Suella Braverman of UK, that she is not in favor of a separate migration mobility deal with India. And that's where she controversially said that Indians overstay. So that shows us that right now the enthusiasm which was displayed under Boris Johnson is no longer present. All right, Boris Johnson गवर्नमेंट के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा एंथुजियाज्म लग रहा था. वो ऐसे भी एंथुजियास्टिक आदमी ही लगते हैं, राइट? अगर आपने देखा हो बोरिस जॉनसन को तो, राइट, टाइम नहीं होता उनके पास कंघी करने का भी. तो इन his administration there was greater keenness on this agreement. In this new administration we see that keenness is no longer there. So we now see that there are differences on spirits. For example, tariff reduction, spirits, वो एक issue बन गया हमारे लिए. दूसरा, migration and mobility, we want a special deal, that is not forthcoming. तीसरा, they want that their companies be permitted to bid for project contracts in India, that's also not forthcoming. So in that context, most of the experts are saying that right now we don't expect this trade negotiation to be finalized. ऐसा अभी नहीं लगता कि ये finalize हो पाएगा. दिवाली गिफ्ट मिलेगा ऐसा नहीं लग रहा है. Alright, हो सकता है न्यू ईयर गिफ्ट मिले, but that would also depend on a lot of conditions, because we understand that the prime minister under whom the trade agreement negotiation started is no longer the primary player. All right, but still we are negotiating, so we hope to benefit in what areas? For example, textiles. So we hope to benefit in reduction in tariff and non-tariff barrier on textiles. Generally UK has been one of the largest markets for Indian textiles है, तो फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट हम यही उम्मीद करते हैं कि टेक्सटाइल्स में बेनिफिट करेगा. ऑल राइट, सेकेंड एरिया दैट वी होप टू बेनिफिट वाज सर्विसेज, मेनली IT enabled services, and in other words we hope to benefit from movement of professionals, right? So right now that is also difficult, but we hope that we will benefit in this particular area, in services, in movement of professionals. That's why we will keep on engaging. But what are the bottlenecks? These are the bottlenecks, that there are differences, clearly differences, right, between India and UK. So now your job is to look at the developments in this particular context. ये trade negotiations हो रहे हैं, न्यूज़पेपर कवर करते रहेंगे, आप देखते रहिएगा, right? Okay. In any case, it would be good if you can develop the habit of reading at least one economic newspaper. बहुत सारे लोग कहते हैं कि ये, बहुत सारे लोग बताते हैं करना नहीं चाहिए. देखो यूपीएससी में कोई शॉर्टकट नहीं होता, तो ये अच्छी बात क्या होगी कि यूपीएससी की तैयारी करते करते आप एजुकेटेड भी हो जाएं, राइट? आप ये कोशिश करें कि आपका कैपेबिलिटी बढ़ता जाए. नाउ वी आर सेइंग दैट द रिलेशनशिप ऑल्सो needs to move in the strategic direction. Strategic cooperation need to deepen. So one is because there is a commitment of developing this relationship in this particular way. Another because there are certain prospects in some areas. So if you see in some areas, for example, defense, we don't have major cooperation to begin with, but we have some exercises. For example, we have the exercise called Indra Dhanush. All right, बहुत सारी चीजों का नाम इंद्रधनुष है. So for example, a scheme for banking sector reform was also called Indradhanush. For example, vaccination program is also called Indradhanush. So here we are talking about India UK exercise is called, Air Force exercise is called Indradhanush. Then we have another exercise called Ajaya Warrior, right? So this is a military exercise. This is the army exercise that we have with that country. And then we had a naval exercise called Konkan. Traditionally, Konkan series of exercises are associated with UK. And thereby, now this is another exercise, that is tri-services exercise, which was named as Konkan Shakti. Alright, Konkan Shakti. So Indradhanush is the Air Force exercise, Ajay Warrior is the exercise between the militaries, and Konkan a naval exercise, and Konkan Shakti tri-services exercise. Combination of the three services. So defense cooperation is one area where both sides can improve their engagements. For example, what we can do is we can work on defense procurement. Defense procurement is not very robust between India and UK. वैसे भी UK को देने के लिए हमको देने के लिए बहुत कुछ है नहीं UK के पास. But for example, we have some examples of defense procurement of the older time, like Jaguar. Jaguar is also a aircraft, fighter aircraft in the Air Force. So here we can think of defense procurement plus partnership in defense manufacturing. Another area is environment or climate and energy. All right, so we have partnerships like UKERI, or we have commitments in the context of COP26, for example, cooperation in green grids. So this is another area of future cooperation between India and UK. UK being a developed country, all right, UK being a developed country, and India being a developing country seeking finance and technology, right? Clean energy partnership between India and UK. all right, as part of their cooperation at COP26, right? You must have heard of the term one sun, one grid, all right? So one sun, one grid जो scheme है, that is something that we envisaged in partnership with UK, all right? So that these are the areas of future, जहां पे हम फ्यूचर में और कमिटमेंट देख सकते हैं और कमिटमेंट हमें देखना चाहिए. यूकेरी इज यूके इंडिया एजुकेशन initiative, education and research initiative, right? So we will see much more cooperation in the area of education also, all right? UK India education and research initiative, right? So this is the future of this particular relation, India and United Kingdom, right? Vijay Mallya overstaying in UK can be made a point, which is that India and UK need to cooperate in the area of law enforcement. For example, deportation of economic offenders. कौन कौन? हाँ, विजय माल्या जी भी वहां पे हैं और नीरव मोदी जी भी वहां पे हैं, राइट? दे आर फाइटिंग देयर केसेस लीगली देयर. सो दैट इज वन एरिया वेयर वी सी दैट वी तो ये आपकी समझदारी है कि विजय माल्या का नाम याद आ गया आपको, तो या तो आप कौन, वो भी वहां पे ले रहा है. तो जो है पहले उसको तो कर लो. मतलब विजय माल्या इकोनॉमिक ऑफेंडर डिक्लेयर्ड है, नीरव मोदी इकोनॉमिक ऑफेंडर डिक्लेयर्ड है. अब उसमें किसी और का नाम जोड़ने से पहले, मतलब मेरे मुंह से निकलवाने से पहले तय कर लो कि हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है. ये तो दोनों तो है ना. तो ये जब भी आपके दिमाग में आता है एज यूपीएससी एस्पिरेंट्स, यू कैन थिंक कि इसका एग्जाम्पल हम कहाँ यूज कर सकते हैं. सो यू कैन यूज इट एज एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ द एरिया इन विच इंडिया एंड यूके नीड टू कोऑपरेट, ऑल राइट? ओके, बाकी आपकी अपनी अपनी प्रेफरेंसेस हैं. नेक्स्ट रिलेशनशिप दैट वी विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट इज इंडिया यूएसए रिलेशनशिप, ऑल राइट? यूक्रेन नहीं, इंडिया यूएसए, इंडिया एंड द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, राइट? सो व्हाट इज द नेम ऑफ दिस रिलेशनशिप? एनीवन? हाउ डू वी रेफर टू दिस रिलेशनशिप? क्या कहते हैं इस रिलेशनशिप को? Comprehensive and global strategic partnership. Comprehensive and global strategic partnership. देखो, on the side note, there are many constitutions, few constitutions on which comparative questions come. This year question on France came presidential election पे, all right? फ्रांस, यूके और यूएस, इन तीन पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम्स की जानकारी होना जरूरी है. यूके यूएस के बारे में आप ज्यादा जानते हैं. सो देयर बाय व्हेन वी से दैट दिस पार्टनरशिप इज बेस्ड ऑन कन्वर्जेंस of values. So you will not be surprised. What values are we talking about? Democracy, but also specifically rule of law, principles like separation of power, all right? These are shared principles. Fundamental rights or Bill of Rights in the case of United States, right? So if you see, we have started using the term commonality of value, commonality of interest in the context of countries which are further away geographically from India. For example, Australia. For example, countries of Europe. For example, countries like United States. Right? This is the same way of saying, for example, जो पास में उनके लिए क्या कहते थे? Cultural and civilizational ties. All right? But one constant part is always interest. All right? And interest we always define in terms of what? Economic interest, पॉलिटिकल एंड डिप्लोमेटिक एंगेजमेंट्स, यही करते हैं ना इकोनॉमी में, ट्रेड एंड इन्वेस्टमेंट, और उसके बाद और एरिया देखने लगते हैं, कहीं पर डिफेंस, कहीं पर टेक्नोलॉजी. सो दैट इज बेसिकली द बेसिक फ्रेमवर्क ऑफ आईआर, कि ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. कन्वर्जेंस ऑफ वैल्यूज. सो व्हाट वैल्यूज? एज वी सेड दैट दिस इज, फॉर एग्जांपल, बहुत सारे जार्गन्स यूज होते हैं, दैट दिस इज अ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन वर्ल्ड्स लार्जेस्ट प्लस वर्ल्ड्स ओल्डेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी. अब ये क्यों ओल्डेस्ट है ये मुझे नहीं पता, बट दिस इज अ जार्गन विच इज यूज्ड. मैं क्यों कह रहा हूं कि ये क्यों ऑलरेडी से मुझे नहीं पता भाई. व्हेन डिड यू गिव द राइट टू वोट टू योर विमेन? in the 20th century. All right. When did you give a large proportion of your population the right to vote, meaning the blacks? Only after civil reforms in gradually in 1960s. आपका जो complete जो civil reforms है वो होता है पूरा 1960s के अंदर, right? So आप अपने एक large part of population you treat as second class citizens and you still call yourself oldest democracy. That is my criticism. But still you can call it oldest democracy in terms of the beginning of that country after the revolutions. What is the year? 1969 में 1771 6 अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन भूल के वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री तो किया होगा ना. इनका इन्वायरमेंट नहीं हुआ है, किसी का ये नहीं हुआ आपको, लेकिन ये साइंस वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री हुआ. सो नाउ प्लीज टेल मी व्हाट इज द ईयर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस ऑफ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स? 1776. चलिए ये देख लीजिएगा. तो ओल्डेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी ये लगातार हम हर लाइन में पढ़ते हैं. दैट रिलेशंस बिटवीन इंडिया एंड यूएस आर रिलेशंस बिटवीन वर्ल्ड्स लार्जेस्ट एंड वर्ल्ड्स ओल्डेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी. बहुत सारे लोग आ रहे हैं. अभय ने कहा 1983, आशा ने कहा 1779. ऑलराइट, ये अलग अलग डेट दे रहे होंगे अलग अलग चीजों के लिए. बट मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि आप जब कहते हैं कि मेरा ये नहीं हुआ वो नहीं हुआ, कारण वो नहीं है आपके पता होने का. कारण ये है कि जब भी कुछ होता है आप सोचते हैं कि अगले साल उसको रिवाइज करूंगा. ऑलराइट, तो अगले साल रिवाइज करोगे तो यही होगा. कोई 1776 कहेगा, कोई 1779 कहेगा. कुछ चीजें मोटा मोटा याद रहनी चाहिए. चलिए, now when we say this we also point out to some commonalities. For example, doctrines like balance of power or values like judicial review. एक क्वेश्चन हमेशा बहुत ही स्टैंडर्ड होता है that India or the Indian system is a via media or is in between the UK and the US when it comes to issues like judicial review. Judicial review हमारे यहाँ है, but not to the extent that it is there in US. All right, and in UK generally that tradition did not exist. अब धीरे 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 UK has moved in the direction of developing a unified judiciary. Right, so ये commonality of values, convergence of values, and then there is convergence of interest. Now this is easier to understand in terms of what? A, convergence of interest. So for example हम कहते हैं कुछ jargons use करते हैं. For example, Prime Minister gave a speech. Right, Prime Minister gave a speech. A lot of Prime Ministers have given a speech in the US Congress. For example, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi as Prime Minister went there and said that the revolution, American Revolution के साथ एक महत्वपूर्ण इंसिडेंट रिलेटेड है. वो क्या है? बोस्टन टी पार्टी सुना है आपने? सो वी सेड कि भाई जो आपके बोस्टन टी पार्टी हुई थी वो इंडिया के टी पे हुई थी. राइट, बट विच इज नॉट फैक्चुअली करेक्ट. चाइना से टी इंपोर्ट कर रहे थे, पर कोई बात नहीं. कॉमनैलिटी हम ढूंढ लेते हैं, हम स्पीच देते हैं, कॉमनैलिटी ढूंढ लेते हैं. उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ये कहा जाता है. इसी तरह से प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी ने एक स्पीच दी. उन्होंने कहा इंडिया एंड यूएस हैविंग overcome the hesitations of history are truly on the path of developing what? Fill in the blanks. आगे क्या लिख सकते हैं? Developing democracy. All right. So टर्म्स का इस्तेमाल कैसे करना है? इंडिया यूएस के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आप इस तरह से शुरू कर सकते हैं. राइट, इंडिया एंड यूएस हैविंग ओवरकम द हेजिटेशंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री आर ट्रूली ऑन द पाथ ऑफ डेवलपिंग अ व्हाट इज दिस पार्टनरशिप कॉल्ड? कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव एंड ग्लोबल स्ट्रैटेजिक पार्टनरशिप. ये कॉमेडी क्या चल रही भाई? इनका काफी हंसता हुआ चेहरा है, सामने बैठ के हंसते रहते हैं मेरे. So that is what we are saying, right? So ऐसा हुआ. अब then this strategic partnership is based on convergence of values, convergence of interests. अब convergence of interest देख लेते हैं. One is diplomatic and political, which is what? India and US, some sources say, have more than 50 dialogue mechanisms. India and US have more than 50 dialogue mechanisms, meaning they have intensified their dialogue over the years. All right. Then we say their dialogues, important dialogues between them are examples like 2+2 dialogue. But various working groups, committees, counter-terrorism dialogue, homeland security dialogue, all right, now counter narcotics dialogue, बढ़ता ही जाता है dialogue. So more than 50 dialogue mechanism, including important dialogues like 2+2 dialogue, diplomatic and political. Not only at the bilateral level, but you see dialogue at the level of where interests are converging, like Quad. Not only this, we also see dialogue at the level of groupings like G20. All right. So there are common platforms of which we are member. Not only this, dialogue on the issue of, let's say, you cannot imagine the UNSC reforms without getting the support of the US. All right. So dialogue at the level of UNSC, either when India is a non-permanent member, US is already a permanent member, or on the issue of UNSC reforms. All right. So these kinds of dialogues. But you will also see what is happening is, you will notice that there are US sponsored initiatives of which India is becoming or is showing an interest in becoming part. For example, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. So thereby you will notice that not this kind of cooperation, not this kind of cooperation, but still cooperation, right? Wherever our interests and our values allow us, we are cooperating with this country. We realize that this is world's largest economy, this is world's largest military spender, and this is, if we say relatively, world's most influential polity, right? Permanent member of the Security Council, largest economy, largest nuclear power, largest defense spender. So that's why we are interacting with this particular country, right? In various ways. So that's one, diplomatic and political engagements. Now we also have our economic engagements. That is where our interests converge. So we see that if European Union is our second largest export market, which is our largest export market? US. So our trade has been growing with this country, trade. So for example, our trade 2021 was around 117 billion US dollars, which means in that particular year, US was our largest trading partner. All right, largest trading partner. Generally also, in most of the years, US has been our largest trading partner, barring the year of 2020-21. US has been our largest trading partner. In that particular year, China was, by official statistics, largest trading partner. But generally, this is the case. US number 1, China number 2, UAE number 3 as individual countries. Otherwise, if you look at trading blocks, it would be US, China still, and European Union, right? So, and then you have trade with either GCC or trade with ASEAN. So it is our largest trading partner. But we also understand here that we also have our own trade differences. And trade differences generally, as we associate with, for example, what happened in the Trump administration, Trump era, where US adopted a much more transactional approach towards India. For example, क्या हुआ आपको याद है? Not visa related necessarily, but For example, generalized system of preference was a preferential trade system that existed between India and the US. So that was withdrawn by the Trump administration. We have disputes at the WTO, right? So India and US have been taking each other to WTO quite a lot, right? And then we can add largely here issues of IPR, intellectual property rights. So there is a report called, आपने सुना होगा, Special 301 report, where India is put in what is called the priority watch list. All right. So differences on IPR and differences, of course, if we add services, differences on immigration related issues. For example, most people know about H1B visa issue, but it is our largest trading partner and we have trade differences. So that means this is an area of interest to remove differences and to take the trade forward. And remember, this is a trade partner with whom we have a high amount of trade without a free trade agreement. A free trade agreement is not jaldi hone wala bhi nahi hai because US is not keen on that. But we are still negotiating a trade arrangement with US. Now we see that this cooperation then also has moved in the direction of areas like energy and technology. Meaning it is going on pretty smoothly by inclusion of other areas. We'll look at these examples. But what is driving this relationship most importantly these days is defense cooperation. All right, defense cooperation. In what sense? So the US has decided to accord India a status called major defense partner. All right, and this started in 2016. Thereby we have signed what are called foundational agreements with the USA. All right, foundational agreements. Thereby we also have initiatives like Defense Technology Trade Initiative, DTTI. All right, and now it is argued that India exercises more with the US than as compared to any other country. Increasing number of exercises. एक simple exercise का नाम लिख लेते हैं, that is Malabar. But we'll talk about it. That we see defense cooperation is developing in a strategic way. Under the framework of India being designated major defense partner by the US. Thereby India and US progressively signing multiple agreements like the foundational agreements. Also, there is some intent of developing what we call co-design and co-production. So this is being done through DTTI like initiatives, Defense Technology Trade Initiative, and our exercises are also increasing. Another exercise in which India participates and US hosts it. This is called world's largest military exercise, that is RIMPAC, Rim of the Pacific exercise, right? So Rim of the Pacific exercise or Malabar exercise or the process of defense cooperation are examples of how India and United States are well on the path of becoming closer defense partners. And then we have defense acquisition. Traditionally, we bought from, let's say, Russia. But now, in terms of defense acquisition, our acquisition from US has crossed 20 billion US dollars. More than 20 billion US dollars in a decade. 10 साल पहले बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं खरीदते थे, 10 साल पहले खरीदना शुरू किया. And by now, we have bought more than 20 billion US dollars worth of equipments from US. Any example? All the fancy names, the Apache helicopters or the Chinook helicopters or the Globemaster transport plane. So we see that here also relations are improving, going forward. But what we see is that this relationship has been propelled by increasing geostrategic convergence. Meaning, what is the long-term glue in this current context? If we can say that defense is a major driver of this relationship, the long-term glue that binds us is the geostrategic convergence, where we see this more clearly in Indo-Pacific, in the arena of Indo-Pacific. And here we see that on certain common issues, for example, rise of China, we may share common concerns and interests in different ways, but also shared ways. All right. For example, US is concerned mainly of China as a next major strategic adversary. But for India, China is an immediate neighbor with which it has major territorial difficulties as well as security challenges. So it would never happen that we will play the same game. ऐसा नहीं होगा that our game would be the same. But in our calculations, we will find each other to be useful for our purpose. This is something that will happen. All right. So to the extent it is possible that we benefit from our partnership with US, we will be keen on advancing the partnership. To the extent US finds it beneficial to partner with India, it will continue with the partnership. But we will also see differences. All right. We will also see differences. For example, yesterday in a batch I started teaching Pakistan. And you will remember when we had started talking about Pakistan, we had said role of external actors, right? So, for example, here also there would be differences. So somebody asks, US has granted support, for example, F-16 aircraft support to Pakistan. This is nothing new. कभी बंद भी नहीं हुआ था. All right? तो हर देश अपने अपने तरीके से काम करता है. तो आज हम भी तो यूएस को बोल रहे हैं ना, हम बोल रहे हैं यूएस को, क्या बोल रहे हैं? अपने काम से काम रखो. रशिया के साथ हमारा रिलेशन अपनी जगह पे है, तो हमको रशिया का रिलेशन भी अच्छा लगता है, आपके साथ भी रिलेशन है, हम कह रहे हैं यूएस को, तो यूएस भी हमसे कह रहा है ये अपने काम से काम रखो. पाकिस्तान के साथ हमारा रिलेशन है जैसे रशिया के साथ तुम्हारा रिलेशन है. तो ये होगा, ये नॉर्मल है, ये कॉमन है. इन डिफरेंसेस के बीच में हमको ढूंढना है कहां हम कॉमन है. तो हम हमेशा अक्सर ध्यान देने लगता है, अक्सर स्टूडेंट की नजर इसी पे जाती है कि ये कर दिया यूएस ने, वो कर दिया यूएस ने, और हम भूल जाते हैं 117 बिलियन यूएस डॉलर्स ऑफ ट्रेड, मेजर डिफेंस पार्टनर designation of India. This is also going on. So thereby we remember when we talk about this convergence of values, there is another thing that connects us. कहीं भी उसको include कर लो, लेकिन हम कह सकते हैं कि this convergence of values also comes from a major factor, which is what? Which is gradually what has happened is India-US relations has acquired bipartisan support, meaning no matter which government is there, this relation cannot be ignored, neither in India nor in US. Bipartisan support. Another is diaspora has emerged as an important pillar of this relation. So we should not forget these things, right? What is basic, major between these countries? 4 million people of Indian origin, more than 4 million people of Indian origin live and work in United States, right? Including many who may have acquired higher political positions like Kamala Harris. बहुत सेलिब्रेट करने की जरूरत नहीं है, लेकिन हाँ ये एग्जाम्पल है कि कैसे इंडियंस आर नाउ क्लाइंबिंग दी रंग. प्रमिला जयपाल, ऑल राइट, many others, Nikki Haley, Bobby Jindal, many people of Indian origin are now in higher position, right? Visible हैं. तो ये भी important है याद रखना कि our relations go beyond any particular issue or differences on any particular issue, right? So that is what our attempt would be, to understand India-US relation within this particular framework. ये framework तो आपको समझ में आ गया? So that is what we'll be doing in the next class. And after completing the US, taking at few US ऐसे करेंगे कि we'll take up some questions related with US that UPSC has asked. All right, and then you will get to know how to deal with them, and in that we will address these issues and differences also. And after US, we will look at two regions, Africa and West Asia. All right, अफ्रीका वेस्ट एशिया में भी हम देखेंगे थोड़ा डायस्पोरा का पॉइंट, वेस्ट एशिया में थोड़ा डायस्पोरा का पॉइंट. तो ये रीजन पूरे होने के बाद वी विल टॉक अबाउट टू इश्यूज विच इज one diaspora, another organization. Now tell me, in your economy, have your economy, is your economy done, both batches? Right, going on for both batches. अच्छा, WTO किया है आपने, कर लिया है ना? तो WTO को नहीं छुएंगे क्योंकि WTO को उठाना फिर लंबा हो जाता है. So we'll focus on UN and India in different aspects, and we'll focus on another organization which is called BRICS, right, of which India is a member. इससे हो जाएगा दो तरह के एग्जाम्पल, पुराना और नया, राइट. मेजर क्वेश्चंस आल्सो हैव कम फ्रॉम दीज, राइट. वर्ल्ड बैंक IMF भी हो गया होगा आपका, वर्ल्ड बैंक IMF होगा ही, तो वर्ल्ड बैंक IMF भी ले लेंगे, राइट. पर WTO आपने इकोनॉमी में कर लिया, ठीक है. तो फिर UN एंड ब्रिक्स मेजर फोकस, एंड देन IMF, वर्ल्ड बैंक टू द एक्सटेंट दैट इज रिक्वायर्ड, ठीक है. So that would be what we will be doing, and we will be completing the course then. Thank you.